When a woman running from her violent ex stumbled into the private elevator of the city's most dangerous crime boss, she thought she'd found sanctuary, until she realized the man who saved her life was far more lethal than the monster she'd escaped. Now, trapped between two worlds of violence, Elena must choose: disappear into safety and lose herself forever, or stay beside the ruthless protector who saw past her fear and awakened something human in a man the world called untouchable. One decision, two men who wanted to own her, and a single stormy night that would change everything. Follow Elena's journey to the very end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The rain fell like violence. Elena Marlowe's hands trembled as she locked the front door of Petals and Thorns, her small flower shop tucked into a quiet corner of the city's arts district. The brass key felt impossibly heavy between her fingers, slick with rain that had already soaked through her cardigan despite the narrow awning overhead. Thunder rolled across the skyline, deep and threatening, shaking the vintage glass of her storefront windows. She should have left an hour ago, should have closed early when the storm warnings first lit up her phone, should have listened to that cold whisper of instinct that had been screaming at her all afternoon to run. But she'd been arranging the window display, white roses and deep purple irises, delicate things that deserved care, and she'd convinced herself that staying late was safe, normal, the kind of thing a woman rebuilding her life was allowed to do without fear. She'd been wrong. Elena. The voice came from behind her, cutting through the rain's static roar. Low, familiar, edged with something that made her stomach drop like a stone into dark water. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. She knew that voice the way prey knew the sound of footsteps in tall grass. Derek Cole. I said your name, baby. Closer now. Close enough that she could smell the bourbon on his breath mixing with rain and cologne that cost more than her monthly rent. Don't be rude. Elena's fingers tightened around her keys until the metal bit into her palm. The street stretched empty in both directions, slick and dark beneath the amber glow of old street lamps. The neighboring gallery had closed hours ago. The coffee shop across the street sat dark, chairs already stacked on tables. She was alone. I'm leaving, Derek. She kept her voice steady, professional, the tone she'd practiced 1,000 times in therapy. Firm boundaries, no engagement. You need to go. We need to talk. No. She started walking, heels clicking sharp against wet pavement. We don't. His hand caught her elbow, not hard enough to bruise, never hard enough to leave marks where people could see, but firm enough to stop her forward momentum, firm enough to remind her of all the times those hands had been less careful. 3 months, he said quietly, and she heard the dangerous edge beneath the false calm. 3 months you've been ignoring my calls, blocking my numbers, pretending I don't exist, because you're not supposed to exist in my life anymore. Elena pulled her arm free, stepping back until her shoulders hit the brick wall beside her shop door. The restraining order is a piece of paper. Derek moved closer, and the streetlight caught his face, handsome in that sharp, corporate way that had first attracted her, before she'd learned what lived behind those perfect features. You think paper matters? You think some judge who doesn't know us gets to decide when we're finished? We were finished the night you put me in the hospital. The words came out harder than she'd intended, sharp enough to make him flinch. For just a second, something like shame flickered across his expression. Then it was gone, buried beneath the self-righteous anger she knew too well. That was an accident, he said. You know that was an accident. I was upset, we were fighting, things got out of hand. You broke my wrist in 2 places. And I apologized. His voice rose, echoing off the wet buildings. I sent flowers, I paid your medical bills. What more do you want from me? To leave me alone. Elena's hand found the pepper spray in her purse, fingers closing around the small canister. To let me live my life. Your life? Derek laughed, the sound ugly and bitter. This life? This pathetic little flower shop in this garbage neighborhood? Baby, look at yourself. You're drowning here. You need me. I don't. You do. He stepped forward again, backing her tighter against the wall. Rain plastered his expensive shirt to his shoulders, dripped from his perfectly styled hair. You're scared and alone and playing at independence, but we both know you can't survive without me. You never could. Elena's thumb found the pepper spray's trigger. Back up, now. Or what? His smile turned cruel. You'll spray me? Call the cops? Baby, I'm a partner at Morrison and Hale. My family has 3 judges on speed dial. You're a florist with a high school diploma and a history of mental health issues. Those issues were diagnosed after you broke me, she said, voice shaking now with fury instead of fear. Everything wrong with my head came from you. Something shifted in his expression. The mask of civilized conversation cracked, revealing the raw possessiveness underneath. You ungrateful little... He lunged. Elena moved on pure instinct, yanking the pepper spray up and pressing the trigger. But Derek was faster than she remembered, his hand knocking her wrist aside so the spray went wide, hitting nothing but rain and brick. Then his weight was against her, crushing her into the wall, his hand wrapping around her throat just tight enough to make breathing hard. You think you can walk away from me? His face was inches from hers, eyes wild with rage and something worse, that desperate, obsessive need that had turned love into ownership. After everything I've given you? After everything I've sacrificed? Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. The world narrowed to the pressure on her throat and the rain and the terrible certainty that she was going to die here, in the rain, outside the shop she'd worked so hard to build. Then his phone rang. Derek's grip loosened just slightly, distracted. Elena didn't think. She brought her knee up hard, catching him in the groin with every ounce of strength she had left. He doubled over with a strangled curse, and she ran. Her heels skidded on wet pavement. Behind her, Derek was already recovering, shouting her name, footsteps pounding after her. Elena ran blind, purse swinging wild from her shoulder, soaked hair plastering to her face. She turned corner after corner, trying to lose him in the maze of streets she knew so well in daylight, but barely recognized in the storm. She could hear him behind her, getting closer. Her lungs burned. Her legs screamed. The rain turned everything into a watercolor blur of lights and shadows. She burst across a major intersection, horns blaring as cars swerved, and found herself in the financial district, all glass towers and empty sidewalks, businesses long since closed for the night. A building loomed ahead, sleek and modern, all dark glass and steel. The lobby glowed with warm light behind automatic doors. Elena didn't hesitate. She crashed through the entrance, water streaming from her clothes, gasping for air that tasted like recycled coolness and expensive cleaning products. The security desk sat empty. Of course it did. After business hours, the night guard was probably making rounds somewhere in the building's upper floors. She was alone in a cathedral of marble and polished steel, her ragged breathing echoing off hard surfaces. Behind her, Derek's silhouette appeared through the rain-streaked glass. He'd seen her enter, was already pushing through the doors. Elena ran deeper into the building, past the unmanned desk, past leather seating areas and abstract art that probably cost more than her entire shop's inventory. She spotted the elevators, a bank of 4, all with glowing call buttons. She slammed her palm against the nearest one, then another, hearing Derek's footsteps getting closer behind her. Elena! His voice bounced off the lobby's high ceiling. Stop running! The elevator dinged. One set of doors slid open with a soft hydraulic whisper. Elena threw herself inside, spinning to jab the door close button over and over with shaking fingers. Through the narrowing gap, she saw Derek break into a sprint, 10 feet away. 5. The doors closed. Elena sagged against the elevator's back wall, chest heaving, water pooling at her feet. She was safe. For now. For this one rising moment. She watched the floor numbers climb, 3, 4, 5, and realized she hadn't pressed a destination. The elevator was moving on its own, taking her somewhere she hadn't chosen. The numbers kept climbing, 10, 15, 20. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel doors, a drowned woman with mascara-streaked cheeks and terror still bright in her eyes. She looked like something dragged from deep water, like something broken. The elevator slowed, stopped. The number 47 glowed above the doors. Elena straightened, trying to prepare herself for whoever might be waiting on the other side. An angry executive working late. Security called by the guard who'd returned to find his post abandoned. Police, if Derek had called them first, spinning some story about his unstable ex-girlfriend breaking into private property. The doors opened. A man stood in the hallway beyond, perfectly still, watching her with eyes the color of smoke and steel. Elena's breath caught. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that fit with the kind of precision that spoke of private tailors and wealth beyond imagining. His dark hair was slightly too long for corporate standards, touching his collar in a way that should have looked disheveled but instead seemed deliberately dangerous. His face was all sharp angles and controlled power. High cheekbones, strong jaw, a mouth set in a line that suggested he rarely smiled and never without purpose. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. They were cold, calculating, the kind of eyes that saw everything and revealed nothing. Eyes that had witnessed terrible things and remained unmoved. This was not an executive working late. This was something else entirely. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice was low, cultured, with an edge like expensive whiskey over broken glass. Elena looked down. Her knee was scraped raw, probably from where she'd fallen on the pavement during her run. Blood mixed with rainwater, trickling down her shin. The word stuck in her throat. She didn't know what to say, how to explain her presence in this private elevator, soaking wet and terrified, clearly running from something she couldn't name. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that should have been threatening but somehow wasn't. "You're afraid." It wasn't a question. He said it like someone identifying a fact, clinical, certain, interested. "I'm sorry." Elena stepped back, pressing herself against the elevator's far wall. Her hand found the button panel, fingers hovering over the door close. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to get away from. Someone hurt you." Again, not a question. His eyes had tracked from her bleeding knee to her throat, where Derek's fingers had left marks beginning to bloom into bruises. "Tonight." Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her neck. "It's not. Yes, but I'm fine. I just need to go." "Where?" The man stepped forward, not entering the elevator but blocking her exit, and Elena realized with a cold shock that she'd been wrong to think he wasn't threatening. Everything about him was threat, from his perfect stillness to the leashed power in his movements, to the way his presence seemed to fill the entire hallway. "Back to the lobby, where he's waiting? Into the storm, to run until he catches you again?" "How do you know? Men who leave marks like that don't give up easily." His gaze returned to her throat, and something dark and dangerous flickered behind those cold eyes. "They chase. They follow. They believe ownership trumps humanity." The accuracy of his words sent ice through Elena's veins. "You don't know anything about my situation. I know you're terrified. I know you ran into a building you don't belong in, took an elevator you didn't choose, and ended up on my floor." He paused, and the faintest hint of something that might have been amusement touched his expression. "That suggests desperation, not plan. Your floor? The top 5 floors belong to me." He gestured vaguely upward. "This is the entrance to my private residence." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd fled from Derek straight into someone else's territory. Someone who clearly had the kind of power and money that made him dangerous in entirely different ways. "I'm sorry," she said again, jabbing the lobby button. "I'll leave right now. I didn't mean to intrude." "He'll be waiting." The man said it calmly, stating fact. "You know this. He'll have positioned himself where he can watch the elevators. The moment those doors open, you'll be trapped." Elena's finger froze on the button. Because he was right. Derek wouldn't just leave. He'd wait, patient as a predator at a watering hole, knowing she had to come down eventually. "Then what do you suggest?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with desperation and exhausted fear. "I can't stay in your elevator all night." "No," the man agreed. "You can't." He stepped back, creating space in the hallway, and extended one hand toward the shadows beyond, an invitation, not a demand. "You can stay here," he said quietly, "until the storm passes, until you're ready to face what's waiting below." Elena stared at him, trying to read threat in his expression and finding only that same cold calculation. This was insane. She didn't know this man. Didn't know what he wanted or why he was offering help to a stranger who'd literally crashed into his private space. But she knew Derek was downstairs. Knew that if she went back down now, scared and alone and exhausted, he would find her, would finish what he'd started. "Why would you help me?" she asked. The man considered the question for a long moment, his expression unchanging. Then he said something that sent chills down her spine in a way that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. Because I recognize the look in your eyes. I've put it there myself, more times than I care to count. His voice remained perfectly level, devoid of either pride or shame. The difference is, I don't enjoy it. He does. It was the honesty that decided her, the complete lack of pretense or false comfort. This man was telling her exactly what he was, dangerous, probably ruthless, someone who had hurt people and would again, and offering help anyway. Elena stepped out of the elevator. The hallway beyond was unlike anything she'd expected. Where the building's lobby had been all corporate coldness, this space breathed with understated luxury, dark hardwood floors, cream walls lined with original art, recessed lighting that cast everything in warm gold. A single door stood at the hallway's end, sleek black wood with a biometric panel instead of a traditional lock. The man walked towards it, his footsteps silent on the polished floor, and Elena followed because she'd already made her choice, and there was nothing to do now but see it through. He pressed his palm to the panel. The door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, the penthouse spread out like something from a dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the storm-dark city far below, lightning flickering between towers of glass and steel. The space was open concept, living area flowing into dining area, flowing into a kitchen that looked like it had never been used. Everything was monochrome elegance, black leather, white marble, chrome and glass, and careful emptiness. It was beautiful, cold, perfect, and completely, utterly lifeless. You're dripping on my floor, the man observed, closing the door behind them with a finality that made Elena's pulse jump. The lock engaged automatically, a series of heavy bolts sliding home. I'm sorry. She looked down at the puddle forming around her ruined heels. It's fine. He shrugged off his suit jacket, draping it over the back of a leather chair with movements that spoke of ingrained habit. The housekeeper will deal with it in the morning. Right now, you need dry clothes before you go into shock. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how violently she was shivering. Adrenaline was leaving her system in waves, replaced by bone-deep cold and exhaustion. I don't want to impose. You already have. He turned toward a hallway branching off the main space. The question is whether you impose while freezing to death or while warm and dry. He disappeared into the hallway before she could respond. Elena stood alone in the massive living room, water still dripping from her clothes, and wondered what the hell she'd just walked into. This man, whoever he was, had wealth that made Derek's corporate salary look like pocket change. He lived alone at the top of a tower like some modern-day king, surrounded by beautiful things that felt more like armor than comfort. And he'd invited a bleeding, terrified stranger into his home without hesitation. Nothing about this made sense. He returned carrying a stack of dark fabric, a t-shirt and sweatpants, both clearly his, both far too large for her. The bathroom is through there. He nodded toward a door near the windows. Leave your wet things on the counter. I'll have them cleaned. Elena took the clothes, her fingers brushing his for just a second. His skin was warm, surprisingly so given how cold everything else about him seemed. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. You don't know what you're thanking me for. The bathroom was all marble and chrome, with a shower that could have fit 5 people and a mirror that took up an entire wall. Elena locked the door, relieved when the lock actually worked, and peeled off her soaked clothes. Her reflection looked even worse under the bright lights. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, hair hanging in wet ropes, the bruises on her throat already deepening to purple. She looked like a victim. Hated that she looked like a victim. Elena cleaned herself up as best she could with the expensive hand towels, erasing the mascara tracks and finger-combing her hair. The t-shirt he'd given her fell nearly to her knees, soft with age and washing. The sweatpants required her to roll the waistband several times to keep them up. She looked ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. But she was warm and dry, and for the first time in hours, not actively running for her life. When she emerged, the man was standing at the windows, looking out over the storm-dark city with a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He'd removed his tie and unbuttoned his collar, the only concession to relaxation she'd seen from him. Better? He asked without turning. Yes, thank you. Elena hesitated, then added, I'm Elena Marlowe. I know. The casual certainty in his voice made her freeze. How? Your shop. He turned to face her, and in the apartment's warm lighting, his features were less harsh, revealing hints of the man beneath the control. He might have been in his mid-30s, with the kind of face that would age into distinguished rather than old. Petals and Thorns on Fifth Avenue. You bought it 8 months ago with a small business loan and your entire savings. You specialize in unusual arrangements, flowers people don't expect together but work beautifully when combined properly. Your Yelp reviews are excellent, though you still struggle with the business side of things. Elena's mouth had gone dry. You've been watching me. No. He set down his glass, movements precise and controlled. I had you investigated after you appeared in my private elevator looking like something from a crime scene. It took my security team approximately 4 minutes to provide a basic background check. That's... Elena didn't know whether to be terrified or impressed. That's insane. That's thorough. He moved to the kitchen, pulling down a second glass. Would you like something to drink? You're still shaking. She was. Her hands trembled visibly, residual adrenaline and shock still working through her system. Just water, please. He poured her water from a bottle that probably cost more than her electric bill, then returned to his own drink. Derek Cole, 34, corporate attorney at Morrison & Hale, history of domestic violence, complaints that were dropped or settled quietly. Restraining order filed 3 months ago by you, which he's violated at least twice that you've reported, and likely more times you haven't. Each fact landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward. Elena sank onto the edge of his leather couch, water glass clutched in both hands. Why do you care about any of this? I don't. The bluntness should have been cruel, but instead felt oddly honest. I care about understanding what happens in my building. You brought danger to my door. I need to know what kind. He's just... Elena stopped, because Derek wasn't just anything. Wasn't just angry or hurt or possessive. He was all those things wrapped in expensive suits and corporate respectability, and that made him more dangerous than someone who wore their violence openly. He won't stop. The restraining order doesn't matter. The distance doesn't matter. He thinks I belong to him. And the police? His family knows people. Elena laughed, the sound hollow and exhausted. Important people. Every time I call, they take a report and nothing happens. Last time, the officer who responded suggested maybe I was being oversensitive, that maybe I should consider whether I was misinterpreting Derek's attempts to reconcile. The man's expression didn't change, but something cold and lethal flickered in his eyes. I see. So I run. Elena set down her water before she dropped it. I keep running, and he keeps following, and I don't know how to make it stop. Silence fell between them, broken only by rain hammering against the windows and distant thunder. The man watched her with that same intense focus, and Elena had the unsettling sense of being catalogued, assessed, filed away in whatever mental database he maintained. What's your name? She asked finally. You know everything about me, but I don't even know what to call you. He hesitated, and for the first time she saw uncertainty cross his features. Then he said, quietly, Damien. Damien Vale. The name meant nothing to Elena, but the way he said it, like it carried weight, like it should mean something, made her think it meant plenty to other people. What do you do, Damien Vale? She tried to keep her voice light, conversational, but heard the edge of fear underneath. That requires this much security and privacy? I manage investments. The lie was smooth, practiced, delivered without hesitation. Venture capital, high-risk portfolios. It requires discretion. Elena didn't believe him for a second. Men who managed investments didn't have the kind of security that could generate a complete background check in 4 minutes. Didn't live in fortresses at the top of towers with locks like bank vaults. Didn't move with the contained violence of someone who'd learned to fight, not in gyms, but in places where losing meant dying. But she was too tired to push, too grateful for the warmth and safety, however temporary, to question the man providing it. I should go. She stood, setting down the water glass. I've already imposed too much, and Derek's probably given up by now. He's still there. The certainty in Damien's voice stopped her. How do you know? Because men like him don't give up. They wait. They plan. They find new angles of attack. He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward her. The image showed the building's lobby and crisp security footage. Derek sat in one of the leather chairs near the elevators, perfectly patient, checking his phone occasionally, but never leaving his post. He's been there for 40 minutes, Damien said. He'll stay until morning if he has to. Longer, if he's particularly obsessed. Elena's legs went weak. She sank back onto the couch, staring at Derek's image. He looked so normal, so reasonable. Someone who belonged in an expensive lobby, waiting for a late meeting or an early flight. No one looking at him would see the monster underneath. I can't stay here all night, she said quietly. You've been kind, but I can't ask. You're not asking, I'm offering. Damien pocketed his phone. There are 3 guest rooms down that hall. Take your choice. Sleep. In the morning, my security will ensure you leave safely. Why? Elena looked up at him, searching his face for ulterior motives and finding only that same controlled neutrality. Why help me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Damien was silent for a long moment, and Elena watched something complex move behind his eyes, calculation mixed with something darker. Something almost like recognition, because no one helped me, he said finally, when I needed it most. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into another part of the vast penthouse, leaving Elena alone with the storm and her questions and the terrifying kindness of a dangerous man. She should have been afraid, should have spent the night awake and alert, ready to run again if needed. But exhaustion won. Elena found the guest room closest to the main living area, another study in monochrome elegance, with a bed that felt like sleeping on clouds, and collapsed into it fully clothed. She dreamed of flowers blooming in frozen gardens, of storms that lasted forever, of eyes the color of smoke watching her from shadows she couldn't quite escape. Elena woke to silence. Not the comfortable quiet of safety, but the unsettling absence of sound that came from being somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere her instincts didn't recognize. For a moment she lay perfectly still, trying to remember where she was and why her body ached like she'd been running for her life. Then it all came rushing back. Derek, the rain, the elevator, the man with smoke-colored eyes who'd offered her shelter in a fortress at the top of the world. Damien Vale. Morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows. She didn't remember leaving uncurtained, painting the guest room in shades of pearl and gold. The storm had passed, leaving the city scrubbed clean and glittering far below. Elena sat up slowly, her muscles protesting. The oversized t-shirt had twisted around her body during the night, and her throat still ached where Derek's fingers had pressed. A soft knock at the door made her freeze. Miss Marlowe! Damien's voice came through the wood, polite and distant. Breakfast is ready, if you're awake. Elena's stomach growled in response, betraying her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, sometime before closing the shop, before Derek had turned her safe space into a hunting ground. I'll be right there, she called back, her voice rough with sleep. She found her clothes from the night before laid out on the bathroom counter, cleaned and pressed to perfection. Even her ruined heels had been polished, though nothing could fix the scuff marks Derek had left when he'd grabbed her. Elena dressed quickly, finger-combing her hair into something resembling order, and tried not to think about the kind of resources required to have clothing professionally cleaned overnight in a private residence. The penthouse looked different in daylight. Less fortress, more museum. Everything was still perfectly arranged, still coldly beautiful, but morning sun revealed details she'd missed in her exhausted terror. The original paintings that had to be worth millions, the sculpture near the windows that looked like something stolen from a gallery, the books lining one wall that appeared untouched by human hands. Damien stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee, with the precise movements of someone who performed every action with intent. He changed into dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that made him look less like a corporate executive and more like something dangerous pretending to be civilized. His hair was still slightly damp, suggesting a recent shower. I wasn't sure what you'd want, he said without looking up, so I had my chef prepare options. Elena blinked. You have a chef? I have several staff members who work flexible schedules based on my needs. He gestured toward the dining table, where an array of breakfast foods had been laid out with the kind of precision usually reserved for magazine photo shoots. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, pastries that looked like they'd been imported from Paris, yogurt parfaits arranged in crystal glasses. Coffee or tea? Coffee, please. Elena moved toward the table, overwhelmed by the display. This is too much. I don't need... You need to eat. Damien set a cup in front of her, the coffee perfectly black. You were in shock last night. Food will help. He was right, though Elena hated that he was right. She took a croissant because it seemed easiest, tearing off small pieces and letting the buttery layers dissolve on her tongue. Damien sat across from her with his own coffee, watching her with that same intense focus that made her feel like a specimen under glass. Your Derek Cole left the lobby at 6:15 this morning, he said conversationally, as though discussing the weather. He waited approximately 9 hours before giving up. Elena's hand stilled halfway to her mouth. You were monitoring him? My security was monitoring him. I was sleeping. Damien took a sip of coffee. Though I received updates every 2 hours. He tried to convince the night guard that you were his girlfriend having a mental health crisis. When that didn't work, he threatened legal action. When that failed, he simply waited. The croissant turned to ash in Elena's mouth. 9 hours. Derek had sat in that lobby for 9 hours, patient and relentless, knowing she had to come down eventually. He'll be back, she said quietly. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. He won't stop. No, Damien agreed. He won't. The blunt certainty should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt something almost like relief. Here, finally, was someone who didn't try to reassure her with empty promises that everything would be fine, that Derek would eventually lose interest, that the system would protect her. What do you suggest I do? The question came out sharper than intended, edged with desperation and exhausted frustration. Keep running? Change my name? Move to a different city and hope he doesn't find me? Would you? Damien tilted his head slightly. Give up everything you've built? Your shop, your life, your identity? I don't know. Elena set down the croissant, her appetite gone. I don't know what else to do. Damien was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm against his coffee cup. Elena watched the movement, hypnotized by the controlled precision of it, and wondered what was happening behind those cold gray eyes. I could make him stop, he said finally. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Elena's breath caught. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. Damien's expression didn't change, but something dark and dangerous moved behind his gaze. I could ensure Derek Cole never bothers you again, permanently. Elena's pulse jumped. She heard the unspoken offer beneath the careful words, understood what permanently meant when spoken by a man who lived in a fortress and had security teams that could generate background checks in minutes. You're talking about killing him, she said. I'm talking about solving your problem. Damien set down his cup with deliberate care. There are varying degrees of solution, some permanent, some merely persuasive. No. The word came out too fast, too loud. Elena stood, backing away from the table. I'm not asking you to hurt anyone for me. You're not asking. I'm offering. Damien remained seated, perfectly calm, as though they were discussing stock portfolios instead of murder. Men like Derek Cole understand only 2 languages, power and fear. Legal systems fail because they speak neither convincingly enough. But there are other methods. I don't want to be the kind of person who solves problems with violence. Elena's hands shook. She pressed them flat against her thighs, trying to steady herself. That makes me just like him. No. For the first time, real emotion cracked through Damien's controlled facade, something fierce and almost angry. Violence in service of ego and control is different from violence in service of protection. One takes power from the helpless. The other returns it. That's a convenient philosophy for someone who clearly has experience with both. The words came out harsher than Elena intended, but Damien didn't flinch. Instead, something that might have been respect flickered across his features. It is, he agreed quietly, and you're right to question it. Most convenient philosophies exist to justify inconvenient actions. He stood, moving to the windows, and Elena watched him stare out over the city with the posture of someone surveying a kingdom. The morning light caught his profile, highlighting the sharp angles of his face and the tension in his shoulders that never quite left. "I'm not a good man, Elena Marlowe," he said without turning. "I've done things that would horrify you. Hurt people who probably deserved it, and some who didn't. Built an empire on choices that exist in the gray spaces between legal and criminal." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. But I don't hurt people for pleasure. I don't take power from those who have none to spare. And I don't allow predators to operate in my city when I have the means to stop them." "Your city?" Elena moved closer, drawn by curiosity stronger than caution. "You don't own this place." "Don't I?" Damien turned to face her, and in the morning light, he looked younger than she'd thought. Mid-30s, maybe, with the kind of weariness that came from carrying too much for too long. "I own 3 of the major commercial properties downtown. I have controlling interests in 2 banks, 4 tech startups, and half the luxury developments going up in the arts district. I employ, directly or indirectly, about 15,000 people. The mayor takes my calls, the police commissioner knows my name." He said it without pride or arrogance, just stating facts the way someone might recite their grocery list. "So yes," he continued, "in every way that matters to men like Derek Cole, I own this city. And I don't tolerate people who hurt others for entertainment in my territory." Elena should have been terrified. This man was admitting to power that made Derek's corporate connections look like playground politics. But instead of fear, she felt something dangerously close to hope. "What are you offering?" she asked carefully. "Protection." Damien moved closer, and Elena forced herself not to retreat. "I have resources Derek Cole can't imagine. Security that doesn't depend on police reports or restraining orders. The ability to make his life so professionally and personally complicated that bothering you becomes more trouble than he's willing to endure." "And what do you want in return?" Because nobody offered that kind of help for free. Elena had learned that lesson the hard way, with Derek, who'd given her everything she thought she wanted before showing her the price. Damien smiled, and it was the saddest expression Elena had ever seen on a human face. "What makes you think I want anything?" "Because everyone wants something." She held his gaze, refusing to look away. "Especially powerful men who invite terrified women into their homes and offer to solve their problems with violence." "Fair." He acknowledged the point with a slight nod. "Then I'll be honest, I want you to stay." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "Not permanently. Not as—" Damien seemed to search for the right words, and for the first time, his perfect control wavered. "I'm not Derek. I'm not asking you to belong to me or give up your autonomy, but this penthouse has been empty for 3 years, except for me and the staff. You were here for 8 hours, and it felt less like a mausoleum." The vulnerability in his voice was so unexpected, so completely at odds with everything else about him, that Elena couldn't find words to respond. "I'm alone most of the time," Damien continued quietly. "By choice, because it's safer that way. For me and for anyone who might otherwise be near me. But last night, having someone here who needed help instead of wanting something from me..." He stopped, shook his head. "I'm explaining this poorly." "No." Elena's voice came out softer than she'd intended. "I understand." And she did, in a way that surprised her. She understood loneliness that came from building walls so high that nothing could reach you, good or bad. Understood the difference between solitude chosen and isolation enforced by circumstances beyond control. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," Damien said. "Just for a while, until we've ensured Derek is no longer a threat. You'd have your own space, your own freedom. You could come and go as you please, work at your shop, live your life. But you'd have security, safety, a place Derek can't reach you." "In exchange for what?" Elena pressed. "Company? Conversation? There has to be something you want from this arrangement." Damien was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that broke Elena's heart in ways she didn't expect. "In exchange for remembering what it feels like to be human." The words hung between them, heavy with implications Elena couldn't fully grasp. She looked at this man, this powerful, dangerous, controlled man, and saw loneliness so profound it made her own isolation look like a temporary inconvenience. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course." Damien moved back toward the kitchen, The moment of vulnerability sealed away behind practiced composure. Take your time. My driver is available whenever you're ready to return to your shop. Elena nodded, mind spinning. She should refuse. Should thank him for his hospitality, go back to her small apartment above the flower shop, and figure out how to handle Derek on her own. Getting tangled up with someone like Damien Vale, someone who admitted to doing terrible things, who spoke of violence and power with the casual certainty of someone who wielded both regularly, was asking for trouble of an entirely different variety. But she couldn't stop thinking about 9 hours. Derek sitting in that lobby for 9 hours, patient and obsessive, waiting for her to have no choice but to face him. "Can I see my shop?" she asked. "Before I decide?" Damien pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times. "Of course. Marcus will have the car ready in 10 minutes. Marcus turned out to be a man in his 50s with the build of a professional boxer and the demeanor of a friendly uncle. He drove a black SUV with windows tinted so dark Elena couldn't see out, and he called her Miss Marlowe with the kind of respect usually reserved for people who mattered. The ride to the Arts District took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Elena sat in the back seat, watching the city slide past in distorted shadows, and tried to organize her chaotic thoughts into something resembling a decision. Damien had stayed behind, citing work that couldn't wait, but he'd given her a phone. Expensive, sleek, with only one number programmed into it. "If anything happens," he'd said, pressing the device into her palm, "anything at all, call." Now Elena turned the phone over in her hands, feeling the weight of the offer it represented. Protection, safety. The resources to make Derek's harassment stop, not through legal systems that had already failed her, but through power applied with surgical precision. All she had to do was accept help from a man who'd admitted to being dangerous, who'd offered to kill for her with the same casual tone someone might use to offer coffee. The SUV pulled up outside Petals and Thorns, and Elena's heart sank. Her shop looked different in daylight, smaller, more vulnerable. The window display she'd been so proud of, white roses and purple irises arranged with careful artistry, was ruined. Someone had thrown something through the glass, shattering the front window into a spider web of cracks. Flowers lay scattered across the sidewalk, trampled and dying. "Wait here, Miss Marlowe." Marcus was out of the car before she could respond, moving with the fluid grace of someone trained to assess threats. He checked the street, the neighboring buildings, then opened her door. "Stay close to me." Elena climbed out on shaking legs. Glass crunched under her feet as she approached the shop. The door stood slightly ajar, the lock broken. Someone had forced their way inside. Derek. She knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. This was his message. His way of telling her that distance and locked doors meant nothing, that he could reach her anywhere, destroy anything she built, turn her safe spaces into crime scenes. "Miss Marlowe, we should call the police." Marcus had his phone out, expression grim. "They won't do anything." Elena's voice sounded distant to her own ears, drained of emotion. "They never do." She stepped through the broken door into her shop, and the destruction took her breath away. Someone had torn through the space with methodical rage, overturning displays, smashing vases, ripping flowers from their arrangements and scattering them across the floor like broken promises. Her register had been forced open. The small amount of cash she kept there gone. Her computer lay smashed on the floor, screen shattered beyond repair. But it was the message spray-painted across her back wall that made Elena's knees go weak. "You can't hide from me." Derek's handwriting. She'd know it anywhere. The aggressive slant of the letters, the way he pressed too hard, leaving marks that cut deep. "We're leaving." Marcus's hand was gentle but firm on her elbow. "Now, this isn't safe." Elena let him guide her back to the SUV, too numb to argue. She sank into the leather seat while Marcus made a call, his voice low and urgent. She caught only fragments: break-in, message, immediate extraction, before he hung up and pulled into traffic with the focused intensity of someone executing a plan. They didn't go back to her apartment. Marcus drove straight to Damien's building, using a private entrance Elena hadn't known existed. The elevator ride to the penthouse passed in silence, broken only by her ragged breathing. Damien was waiting when the doors opened. He took one look at Elena's face, and his expression went cold in a way that should have been terrifying, but instead felt almost protective. "What happened?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "Her shop was vandalized," Marcus reported. "Broken window, forced entry, extensive damage. Message left on the wall threatening her directly. Show me. Marcus pulled out his phone, displaying photos he must have taken while Elena stood frozen in her ruined shop. Damien studied each image with the focused intensity of someone cataloging evidence for trial. When he reached the spray-painted message, something dark and lethal flickered across his features. Derek Cole did this, he said. Not a question, a certainty. Yes, Elena's voice cracked. He did it after he left your lobby, after he spent 9 hours waiting for me. This was his way of making sure I knew he'd never stop. Damien handed the phone back to Marcus without looking away from Elena. Get cleaning crews to the shop immediately. Full restoration, no expense spared. I want it looking better than new by end of business tomorrow. And get me everything we have on Derek Cole, financials, associates, weaknesses, everything. Yes, sir. Marcus disappeared into the elevator, leaving them alone. Elena stood in the middle of the penthouse, still wearing yesterday's clothes, still shaking from the violation of seeing her dream destroyed. She'd built that shop from nothing. Every flower, every arrangement, every carefully chosen vase had been a brick in the wall she'd constructed between herself and the helpless woman Derek had tried to make her. And he'd torn it down in a single night of rage. I'm sorry. Damien's voice was softer now, almost gentle. I should have anticipated he'd escalate. This isn't your fault. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together pieces that wanted to shatter. I'm the one who ran to your building. I'm the one who brought this to your door. You brought nothing. Damien moved closer, and Elena didn't have the energy to retreat. Derek Cole brought his obsession and violence to your life long before last night. You were simply trying to survive it. I don't know how much longer I can keep surviving it. The admission came out broken, exhausted. He'll destroy everything I build, every place I feel safe, every small piece of normalcy I try to claim. He'll take it all and leave me with nothing but fear. No, the single word carried absolute conviction. He won't. Elena looked up, meeting those smoke-gray eyes, and saw something fierce and protective burning behind the cold control. Stay, Damien said quietly. Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because you're afraid. Stay, because I can give you what the legal system can't, actual protection. The resources to rebuild your shop and your life without constantly looking over your shoulder. The power to make Derek Cole understand that you're not alone anymore. I barely know you. But even as Elena said it, she knew it was a weak protest. This man had shown her more genuine care in 12 hours than Derek had in 2 years of manufactured romance. Then get to know me. Damien held out his hand, palm up, offering without demanding. Stay here. Work at your shop when it's safe. Let me help you remember what it feels like to live instead of just survive. Elena stared at his outstretched hand. She thought about her ruined shop, about Derek's patient 9-hour wait, about spray-painted threats and broken glass and the certainty that nothing would change unless she changed it. Then she thought about Damien's admission that he wanted to remember how to be human, about the loneliness in his eyes when he'd looked at her across the breakfast table, about the careful distance he maintained even while offering help. He wasn't Derek. Whatever darkness lived in Damien Vale, it came from different sources, served different purposes. He'd admitted to being dangerous without trying to hide behind false nobility, had offered violence as a tool, not a threat, had given her choices instead of demands. Elena took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, surprisingly gentle for someone who'd admitted to terrible things. He didn't pull her closer, didn't try to claim the touch as permission for more. Just held her hand like it mattered, like she mattered, like this small gesture of trust was something precious instead of expected. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. For a while. Until we figure out how to make this stop. Something that might have been relief flickered across Damien's face. Thank you. Don't thank me. Elena managed a shaky smile. I'm the one accepting help from a man who casually offers to make people disappear. I never said disappear. But there was the faintest hint of dark humor in his voice. I said stop bothering you. There are many ways to accomplish that goal. Most of them don't require permanent solutions. Most of them? I believe in proportional responses. Damien released her hand, stepping back to give her space. Derek destroyed your property and threatened you directly. The response will match the offense. Elena should have pressed for details, should have demanded to know exactly what proportional response meant in Damien Vale's world. But exhaustion was crashing over her in waves, and she couldn't find the energy to question the methods of the man offering to save her. "I need to sleep," she said instead. "Is it okay if I use the same room as last night?" "Any room you want." Damien gestured toward the guest hallway. "This is your home now, for as long as you need it. Make yourself comfortable." Elena nodded, too tired for more words, and retreated to the guest room. She collapsed onto the cloud-soft bed, still wearing her clothes. And this time, when she closed her eyes, she didn't dream of storms or flowers or Derek's hands around her throat. She dreamed of smoke-colored eyes watching over her from shadows, keeping the monsters at bay. When she woke hours later, the sun had moved across the sky, painting the penthouse in amber and gold. Elena emerged from the guest room to find the living area transformed. Someone had brought in flowers, dozens of arrangements in crystal vases, filling the cold space with color and life, and the green scent of growing things. Damien stood at the windows, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones she couldn't quite catch. He'd changed into dark jeans and a black t-shirt that made him look less like a businessman and more like something dangerous taking a break from being threatening. He ended the call when he saw her, pocketing the phone with smooth precision. "You're awake." "You bought flowers." Elena moved closer to the nearest arrangement, white peonies mixed with dusty pink roses, exactly the kind of unexpected combination she favored in her own work. "I had them brought from your shop before the cleaning crews arrived." Damien's voice was carefully neutral. "The ones Derek didn't destroy. I thought you might want them here." Elena's throat tightened. It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but it meant he'd thought about what would make this cold penthouse feel more like home for her. Had understood that she needed beauty around her the way other people needed air. "Thank you," she managed. "You're welcome." Damien moved toward the kitchen. "Are you hungry? I can have something prepared." Actually, Elena stopped, then forged ahead before she could second-guess herself. "Could we cook something? Together? I know you have a chef, but I'd like to do something normal. Something that doesn't involve security teams or property destruction or existential conversations about violence and protection." Damien looked surprised, then something that might have been pleased. "I'm not much of a cook." "Neither am I." Elena smiled despite everything. "But I can follow directions, and surely between the two of us we can manage not to burn down your kitchen." "Fair point." He opened the massive refrigerator, revealing enough food to feed a small army. "What did you have in mind?" They settled on pasta. Simple, hard to ruin, requiring just enough focus to keep Elena's mind from spiraling into darkness. Damien proved surprisingly competent at following recipe instructions, his precise nature translating well to measured ingredients and timed cooking. Elena chopped vegetables with a knife that probably cost more than her rent, and tried not to think about spray-painted threats or broken glass, or the fact that she'd moved into a stranger's penthouse because her ex-boyfriend had destroyed her life. "Tell me about your shop," Damien said as he stirred sauce on the stove. "What made you want to work with flowers?" "My grandmother." Elena smiled at the memory. "She had this garden, nothing fancy, just a small plot behind her house, but she could make anything grow. She used to tell me that flowers were proof that beautiful things could exist even in difficult places, that something could push through concrete and still bloom." "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Elena's smile turned sad. "She died right before I met Derek. I was grieving and lost, and he seemed so stable, so together. I thought he was going to help me rebuild. Instead, he just found new ways to tear me down." Damien was quiet for a moment, focused on the sauce. Then he said, "People in pain make easy targets for predators. They disguise control as care until you're too tangled up to see the difference." The observation was too accurate, too specific. Elena studied his profile, seeing new layers beneath the controlled surface. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." "Everyone has experience with predators." Damien kept his attention on the stove. "Some of us just learned earlier than others." Elena wanted to push, to ask what had happened to make him this way, this strange combination of dangerous and careful, powerful and lonely. But she recognized the wall in his voice, the same barrier she put up when people asked too many questions about her time with Derek. They ate at the dining table overlooking the city, and it should have been awkward, two strangers sharing a meal in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. But somehow it wasn't. Damien asked careful questions about flower symbolism and arrangement techniques. Elena told him stories about difficult customers and wedding disasters. They existed in the small, normal space between crisis and consequence, pretending for an hour that they were just two people sharing dinner instead of a woman fleeing violence and the man offering to destroy her tormentor. "This is nice," Elena said eventually, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I haven't had a normal conversation in months. Derek made everything into a test or a trap. I forgot what it felt like to just talk to someone." "Then we'll do more of it." Damien refilled her wine glass with movements that suggested expensive training. Normal conversations, normal dinners, as much normality as you need to remember who you are when you're not running. And in exchange, I get to remember what it's like to have someone in this space who isn't staff or security or people who want something from me. He met her eyes across the table. Fair trade? It should have felt like a business transaction. Should have made Elena uncomfortable with its transactional nature. But there was something honest in the arrangement, two lonely people offering each other company without pretense or expectation. "Fair trade," she agreed. They cleaned up together and Elena found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it, washing while Damien dried, working side by side in comfortable silence. When they finished, he showed her how to work the sound system, the massive television, the coffee maker that looked like it required an engineering degree to operate. "Make yourself at home," he said again. "Anything in this place is yours to use. The library, the gym on 46, the rooftop terrace when the weather's good." "You have a rooftop terrace?" "I own the building." Damien said it without arrogance, just fact. "The top 3 floors are mine." The terrace seemed like a logical addition. Elena laughed despite everything, and the sound startled them both. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed. Really laughed, not the forced politeness Derek had demanded or the brittle humor she used to deflect concern. "What?" Damien looked almost confused. "Nothing, just—" Elena shook her head. "You're so matter-of-fact about having unlimited resources. I own the building, so obviously I added a private rooftop terrace." "Well, like that's normal." "It is normal. For me." But there was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "I'm gathering it's not normal for most people?" "Not even slightly." The smile grew, transforming his face from coldly handsome to something warmer, more human. "Then I'll try to remember to be appropriately awed by my own privilege." "Please don't." Elena found herself smiling back. The honesty is refreshing. Derek used to pretend his family money didn't matter, that he was just a hard-working lawyer making his own way. But he'd use it like a weapon whenever I didn't behave the way he wanted. Having someone just acknowledge that they have resources without making it a power play, that's different. Damien's expression sobered. "I won't lie to you, Elena. Not about what I have or what I'm capable of. You deserve honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Even about the terrible things you've done? Especially about those." He held her gaze, unflinching. "You should know exactly who you're accepting help from." And Elena realized she did know. Not the specifics, not the details of whatever empire he'd built or crimes he'd committed, but she knew the essential truth. Damien Vale was dangerous, powerful, and capable of violence. But he directed that violence outward, at threats, not inward, at the vulnerable. That made all the difference. Her phone buzzed. Not the one Damien had given her, but her regular phone, still somehow alive in her purse. Elena pulled it out, and her blood went cold. 15 missed calls from Derek. 23 text messages. The most recent had come through minutes ago. "I know where you are. I know who you're with. This won't protect you. Nothing will." Damien's eyes went cold and flat as he read the message over Elena's shoulder. Not angry, anger was hot, explosive, the kind of emotion that clouded judgment. This was something else entirely. This was calculation wrapped in ice, the expression of a man deciding exactly how much force to apply to eliminate a problem. "He's bluffing," Damien said, his voice unnaturally calm. "He doesn't know where you are. He's guessing, trying to frighten you into making contact." But Elena saw the lie in the tension that had entered his shoulders. the way his hand moved unconsciously toward his phone. Derek's message had been too specific, too confident. He said he knows who I'm with. Elena's voice shook despite her best efforts to control it. How would he know that unless he's been watching? Because Derek Cole is a lawyer who knows how to leverage partial information into psychological warfare. Damien took her phone, scrolling through the other messages with swift efficiency. Look at the progression. The first 10 are generic threats and apologies. Standard abuser pattern. Then around message 15, he shifts tactics. I saw you get into a black car. That's observation, probably from this morning when Marcus picked you up. Elena's stomach lurched. She'd been so focused on the destroyed shop that she hadn't thought about Derek watching from somewhere nearby, cataloging details to use against her later. Then he makes logical leaps, Damien continued, still scrolling. You think some rich man can save you? He's guessing based on the car, the neighborhood, the type of building you entered. He doesn't actually know anything concrete. But the last message is him casting a wide net and hoping you'll confirm his suspicions by responding. Damien handed back her phone. Don't. Let him wonder. Uncertainty is worse than confirmation for men like him. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Derek was just guessing, that her location remained secret, that the fortress walls around Damien's penthouse were as impenetrable as they seemed. But fear had lodged itself deep in her chest, cold and heavy, whispering that nowhere was truly safe. I should leave, she said quietly. I'm putting you at risk. If Derek escalates, if he does something crazy, then I'll handle it. Damien's absolute certainty should have been arrogant, but instead felt oddly reassuring. Elena, look at me. She did. His eyes had warmed slightly, the ice retreating to reveal something almost gentle underneath. Derek Cole is a corporate lawyer with connections and money, he said. I respect neither. His threats work on people who operate within normal systems, police, courts, social structures that care about reputation and legality. I don't. If he comes for you here, he'll discover very quickly that he's out of his depth. You can't just... Elena stopped, because she was talking to a man who'd already offered to make Derek disappear, who clearly had the resources and willingness to follow through. I don't want you to do something you can't take back. I've done plenty I can't take back. Damien's expression didn't change. A few more actions won't make much difference to my soul's accounting. That's not funny. I'm not joking. But there was something in his voice, not quite humor, but maybe acknowledgement of the absurdity. I'm simply being honest about who I am. You should know that about me by now. Elena did know. That was the terrifying part. Damien Vale was exactly who he claimed to be. Dangerous, powerful, operating by rules that had nothing to do with courts or laws or the systems that had failed to protect her. And instead of running from that danger, she was standing in his penthouse, accepting his protection, trusting him to keep her safe. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Derek. Silence won't save you. I'll find you. I always do. Give me your phone. Damien held out his hand, palm up. Not demanding, just offering. Please. Elena hesitated, then handed it over. Damien pulled out his own phone, made a quick call, spoke in low tones she couldn't quite hear. When he hung up, he turned her phone over in his hands, examining it like a puzzle to be solved. Derek's been tracking you, he said, probably since you left him. There are apps that can be installed remotely if you know someone's passwords. There's security questions, the right social engineering tricks. Cold dread pooled in Elena's stomach. You think he's been watching me this whole time? I think he's been monitoring your location and possibly your communications. Damien's jaw tightened, which means he does know you're in this building, though not specifically where. My security team is sweeping now to confirm, but we should assume he has your general location. Oh my God. Elena sank onto the couch, feeling violated in a way that went beyond Derek's physical violence. He's been tracking me for 3 months, since I got the restraining order, since I thought I was finally safe. You were never safe from him using conventional methods. Damien sat beside her, careful to maintain distance. That's what men like Derek count on, that their victims will trust the same systems the abusers have learned to manipulate. But we're going to fix this. How? First, we get you a new phone, completely clean, number he doesn't have, registered to a name he can't trace. Damien was already typing on his own device. Second, we upgrade building security. No one gets past the lobby without biometric clearance. Third, we ensure your shop has proper protection when you return to work. I can't afford. I'm not asking you to afford anything. Damien looked up, and his expression was so fierce it stole Elena's breath. This is my city, my building. You're under my protection now. Derek Cole doesn't get to terrorize you anymore. Why? The question burst out before Elena could stop it. Why do you care this much? I'm nobody, just a florist who ran into your elevator because I was scared. You don't owe me anything. Damien was quiet for a long moment, and Elena watched something complex move across his features, calculation, mixing with what might have been old pain. Because no one stopped the person who hurt me, he said finally, voice low and rough with something that sounded like buried rage. No one intervened when I was young and powerless and trapped in a situation I couldn't escape. They all looked away, told themselves it wasn't their business, convinced themselves that suffering built character. And by the time I was old enough to save myself, I'd become something I'm not sure deserved saving. Elena's throat tightened. She'd suspected darkness in Damien's past, seen hints of old wounds in the careful control he maintained. But hearing him confirm it, hearing the echo of trauma in his too calm voice, made her heart ache in unexpected ways. You deserve saving, she said quietly. Everyone does, especially children. Maybe. Damien's expression closed off, the vulnerability sealed away behind familiar ice. But I didn't get it, so now I make sure other people do, when I can. When they end up in my elevator, bleeding and terrified, running from monsters who think ownership is love. He stood, movements sharp with tension he was trying to control. I'm going to make some calls, get the security upgrade started. There's dinner in the refrigerator if you're hungry later. The chef left preparations you just need to heat. Make yourself comfortable. Then he was gone, disappearing into what Elena assumed was a home office, leaving her alone with her tracked phone and Derek's threatening messages and the growing certainty that she'd stumbled into something far more complicated than simple protection. Elena sat in the quiet penthouse, surrounded by flowers that had survived her shop's destruction, and tried to process everything. Damien Vale was offering her safety, but the price was becoming entangled with a man who admitted to terrible things, who'd been hurt badly enough that it had shaped him into someone dangerous, who looked at her like she represented something he'd lost and desperately wanted to remember. Her phone buzzed again. She should stop looking, should let Damien handle it like he'd said. But the compulsion was too strong. She had to know what Derek was saying, had to monitor the threat so she could prepare for it. You think money will protect you? Power? I'll destroy him the same way I'll destroy you, slowly, thoroughly, until there's nothing left. Elena's hands shook as she set down the phone. Derek wasn't just threatening her anymore. He was threatening Damien. And while part of her knew that Damien could handle himself, was probably far more dangerous than Derek could imagine, another part whispered that this was her fault. That by accepting Damien's protection, she'd painted a target on someone who'd only tried to help. She found Damien in a room off the main living area, all dark wood and leather furniture, with windows overlooking the city and walls lined with books that looked actually read. He sat behind a massive desk, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped tones about security protocols and background checks and surveillance upgrades. When he saw her in the doorway, he held up one finger, wait, and finished his conversation. I want it done by tomorrow. I don't care what it costs. Yes, good. He hung up, attention shifting fully to Elena. What's wrong? He threatened you. Elena held out her phone, showing Derek's latest message. He's going to come after you now, because of me. Damien read the message without any visible reaction. Then, to Elena's surprise, he laughed. Not cruelly, but with genuine amusement that transformed his face into something younger, less burdened. Let him try, he said, handing back her phone. I've had senators, mob bosses, and cartel operators threaten me with everything from lawsuits to assassination. Derek Cole is a small-time predator playing at being dangerous. He has no idea what actual danger looks like. You're not worried at all? About Derek? Damien leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Elena had met him, he looked almost relaxed. No, I'm annoyed that he's upsetting you, but worried? Elena, men like Derek operate on fear and control. They're effective against vulnerable targets because they exploit power imbalances. But I'm not vulnerable, and the power imbalance runs the wrong direction. He's a mouse threatening a wolf. The comparison should have been disturbing, should have reminded Elena that she was accepting protection from someone who casually compared himself to predators. But instead, she felt something like relief. Derek had seemed invincible for so long, untouchable behind his family connections and legal expertise. Seeing someone dismiss him as insignificant was almost cathartic. "I don't want you to hurt him," she said anyway, needing to establish boundaries while she still could. "Not permanently. I just want him to leave me alone." "But I know." Damien's expression softened. "And I'll respect that boundary. But Elena, you need to understand something. Derek won't stop on his own. Men like him escalate until someone forces them to stop. That force can be legal, restraining orders, police intervention, criminal charges, or it can be extra-legal. But it has to be decisive. Half measures just make them more determined." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that I have resources the police don't. Leverage. Derek's employers would find interesting. Information about his activities that might not rise to criminal behavior but would certainly damage his reputation and career." Damien's voice remained calm, factual. "I'm suggesting that we make continuing to harass you so professionally and personally costly that he decides you're not worth the trouble." It was logical, strategic, the kind of approach that didn't require violence but would be just as effective. Elena wanted to protest, to insist on handling this herself through proper channels, but proper channels had failed her repeatedly. The restraining order was worthless paper. The police couldn't be bothered. The legal system treated Derek's harassment as a nuisance rather than the systematic campaign of terror it actually was. "What kind of information?" she asked carefully. "That depends on what my team discovers." Damien pulled up something on his computer, turned the screen toward her. Initial background check showed some interesting patterns. Derek has a history of aggressive behavior at work, complaints that were settled quietly, ND as signed, money changing hands. There are at least 3 other women who filed restraining orders against him that were later dropped, and his financials suggest spending habits that don't align with his declared income. Elena stared at the screen, seeing Derek's life laid out in clinical detail. "You got all this in one day?" "I have good people." Damien closed the laptop. "The question is whether you're comfortable with me using this information. I won't do anything you're not okay with. This is your situation, your choice." "And if I say no?" Elena searched his face for signs of anger or manipulation. "If I ask you to drop this and let me handle it my way?" "Then I drop it." Damien said it with such simple certainty that Elena almost believed him. "Your autonomy matters more than my methods. I'll keep you safe while you're in this building, but beyond that, it's your decision." Elena thought about her destroyed shop, about 9 hours of Derek waiting in the lobby like a patient predator, about spray-painted threats and tracking apps, and the crushing weight of fear that had become her constant companion. "Use it," she said quietly. "Whatever you find, whatever leverage you can create, use it. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of him winning." Something that might have been respect flickered across Damien's features. "Okay, I'll start making calls tomorrow. In the meantime, the new security protocols will be active by tonight. No one gets near you without going through multiple layers of protection." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for what he was offering, but Elena didn't know what else to say. "Don't thank me yet." Damien stood, moving around the desk toward her. "We haven't solved anything. We've just changed the battlefield." He was right. Derek wouldn't simply give up because Damien had money and influence. He'd fight back, escalate, find new ways to hurt her. But at least now Elena wasn't fighting alone. "I'm going to make some tea," she said, needing to do something normal, something that didn't involve security protocols or leverage or the systematic destruction of her ex-boyfriend's life. "Do you want any?" Damien looked surprised by the question, as though the concept of someone offering him tea in his own home was foreign. "Yes, thank you." They moved to the kitchen together, and Elena found the expensive tea collection Damien apparently never used. She chose chamomile for herself and something dark and smoky for him that seemed to match his personality. The ritual of boiling water and steeping leaves gave her something to focus on besides the chaos swirling around them. "Tell me about your flowers," Damien said as they waited. "You said your grandmother taught you. What was her favorite?" "Peonies." Elena smiled at the memory. She said they were proof that something could be beautiful even while dying. They only bloom for a few weeks, but when they do, it's spectacular. Sounds like her philosophy about more than just flowers. It was. Elena poured water over tea leaves, watching them unfurl in the heat. She grew up during the war, not much beauty or safety anywhere, but she learned to find it in small things: flowers pushing through rubble, kindness from strangers, moments of peace between chaos. She sounds remarkable. She was. Elena handed Damien his tea. She would have liked you, I think. I doubt that. Damien's smile was sad. Remarkable women usually have good instincts about dangerous men. She had good instincts about complicated men, Elena corrected. My grandfather was a Marine who came back from deployment with what we'd now call PTSD. She loved him anyway, built a life with him, taught him that darkness didn't make him unworthy of light. Damien was quiet for a long moment, tea forgotten in his hands. Did it work? Yes. They were married 43 years when he died. He was difficult sometimes, haunted always, but never cruel. Never violent toward her or their children. She said love didn't fix broken people, but it gave them a reason to fix themselves. You think I'm broken? It wasn't a question. I think we're all broken. Elena met his eyes over her tea. Some of us just hide it better than others. They drank in comfortable silence, and Elena realized this was becoming familiar, these small moments of normalcy stolen between crisis points, tea in expensive kitchens, conversations about dead grandmothers and damaged souls, the strange intimacy of two lonely people finding unexpected comfort in each other's company. I should get some work done, Damien said eventually, but I'll be in my office if you need anything. And Elena, he paused, seemed to wrestle with something, then continued. I meant what I said earlier. You're safe here. Whatever Derek tries, he won't reach you. Elena nodded, throat too tight for words. She watched him disappear back into his office, then spent the next hour arranging and rearranging the rescued flowers, trying to create beauty from broken things. The afternoon faded into evening. Elena explored the penthouse, discovering a library filled with first editions and philosophy texts, a gym that looked like it belonged in a professional training facility, and a terrace that did indeed span the entire roof, complete with gardens that someone clearly maintained with obsessive care. She found Damien there as the sun set, standing at the edge with his hands in his pockets, looking out over the city like a king surveying his domain. The golden light caught his profile, highlighting the sharp angles and the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. This is beautiful, Elena said, approaching carefully. I didn't expect gardens up here. My mother loved flowers. Damien didn't turn, kept his attention on the sunset. Before she died, she used to say that nothing truly bad could happen in a place where things grew. I built this to remember her. The admission was so unexpected, so vulnerable, that Elena didn't know how to respond. She moved closer, standing beside him at the railing, and looked out at the city painted in amber and rose gold. What happened to her? She asked softly. Cancer. 16 years ago. Damien's voice was carefully neutral, emptied of emotion. Fast and brutal. She was gone 6 months after diagnosis. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was the only good thing in my childhood. Her death was a mercy compared to watching what my father would have done to her if she'd lived longer. The casual reference to abuse sent ice through Elena's veins. She looked at Damien's profile, seeing old pain buried beneath practiced control, and understood with sudden clarity why he'd offered to help her, why he recognized the look in her eyes, why he spoke about violence and protection with the authority of someone who'd experienced both sides intimately. Your father hurt you, she said. Not a question. My father was a businessman who believed children should be grateful for expensive things and silent about everything else. Damien's jaw tightened. He had very specific ideas about strength and weakness, about what made someone worthy of his name and money. I failed to meet those standards repeatedly. That's not failure. That's abuse. The distinction matters less than you'd think when you're 10 years old and locked in a basement for crying at your mother's funeral. Damien said it without inflection, stating facts about someone else's life. But it taught me useful lessons about power, about the difference between strength that protects and strength that destroys, about what happens when no one intervenes. Elena's heart cracked open. She thought about 10-year-old Damien, trapped, and grieving, learning that the world was cruel and no one was coming to save him. Thought about how that child had grown into this man, controlled and dangerous, and so carefully isolated that his penthouse felt like a beautiful prison. "I'm glad you survived," she said quietly. "Are you?" Damien finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were haunted. "Because I'm not sure the person I became is worth what it cost to create him." "You're helping me." Elena held his gaze. "Whatever else you've done, whoever else you've hurt, you're choosing to help someone who needs it. That matters." "Does it? Or am I just repeating patterns, finding new ways to exert control over vulnerable people?" His smile was bitter. "You're in my home, eating my food, dependent on my protection. How is that different from Derek, really?" "Because you gave me a choice." Elena stepped closer, needing him to understand. "Derek took my choices away piece by piece until I couldn't remember what autonomy felt like. You keep offering me choices, keep asking permission, keep making sure I know I can leave. That's the difference." Damien looked at her like she'd said something profound, something he needed desperately to hear. "I don't want to be another trap for you, another cage dressed up as safety." "Then don't be." Elena reached out, let her hand rest lightly on his arm. "Keep giving me choices. Keep being honest about who you are. Let me decide for myself what I can handle." His hand covered hers, warm and steady. "And if you decide I'm too dangerous, too broken, then I'll tell you and you'll let me go." Elena squeezed his arm gently. "But Damien, you're not as broken as you think you are. Broken people don't build gardens to remember their mothers. They don't offer protection without demanding payment. They don't worry about being good enough for the traumatized florist who crashed into their elevator." A sound escaped him. Half laugh, half something that might have been a sob if he'd allowed it full voice. "You have entirely too much faith in me." "Maybe. Or maybe you've spent so long being the person your father tried to create that you've forgotten the person your mother raised." Elena pulled back, giving him space. "Either way, you're stuck with me for now. So you might as well accept that I'm going to keep seeing the good in you, even when you try to convince me it doesn't exist." "Stubborn." "Absolutely," Elena grinned. "It's how I survived this long." They stood together as darkness fell over the city, and Elena felt something shift between them. Not romance, not yet. They were both too damaged, too cautious for that. But something warmer than simple protection, something that felt almost like the beginning of trust. Elena's new phone buzzed. Damien's security team had delivered it an hour ago, clean and untraceable. She pulled it out, half expecting more threats despite the new number. Instead, she found a message from an unknown contact. "Your shop will be ready tomorrow. Thought you might like to see the progress." Below the message was a photo. Elena's breath caught. Petals and thorns looked transformed. The broken window had been replaced with pristine glass. The door hung straight and new, with a lock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. Through the window, she could see fresh paint, new displays, equipment that was better than what she'd started with. "He works fast," Damien said, looking at the photo over her shoulder. "This is too much." Elena stared at the image. "I can't accept." "You can, and you will." Damien's voice was firm but not unkind. "Consider it an investment in the neighborhood. Property values improve when local businesses thrive." "That's a terrible justification." "It's the best you're getting tonight." He smiled slightly. "Would you like to see it in person tomorrow? I can arrange security for a visit." Elena wanted to say no. Wanted to maintain some independence, some sense that she wasn't becoming completely dependent on Damien's resources and protection. But she also desperately wanted to see her shop, to reclaim that space Derek had violated, to prove that she could still have something beautiful that belonged to her. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." "Then we'll go first thing." Damien checked his watch. "It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow will be complicated." He was right. Though Elena suspected every day from now on would be complicated, she'd tangled her life with a dangerous man's protection, painted herself into Derek's crosshairs more surely than before, and committed to a path that might lead anywhere. But as she headed to the guest room that was starting to feel almost like home, Elena realized she wasn't afraid. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something other than terror and exhaustion. She felt hope, The hope lasted until 3 in the morning, when alarms shrieked through the penthouse like air raid sirens. Elena jolted awake, heart hammering, disoriented in the darkness. Red emergency lights flickered to life along the baseboards, painting everything in hellish crimson. Damien appeared in her doorway seconds later, fully dressed despite the hour, phone in one hand and something that looked disturbingly like a gun in the other. "Stay here," he commanded, voice sharp with authority that brooked no argument. "Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Marcus." "What's happening?" "Someone tried to breach building security." His expression was cold, lethal. 3 guesses who. Then he was gone, disappearing into the chaos, leaving Elena alone with the screaming alarms and the terrifying certainty that Derek had found her after all. Elena locked the door with shaking hands and backed away from it, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The alarms continued their piercing wail, drilling into her skull, making it impossible to think clearly. Red emergency lights pulsed along the floor, casting the guest room in stuttering crimson that made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. She grabbed her phone, the new one Damien had given her, and stared at the blank screen, willing it to light up with information, with reassurance, with anything that would tell her what was happening beyond her locked door. Minutes crawled past like hours. The alarms cut off abruptly, leaving a silence so profound it felt oppressive. Elena stood frozen in the center of the room, listening to her own ragged breathing and the distant sound of voices she couldn't quite make out. Men's voices. Multiple. Some calm, some urgent. A knock at her door made her jump. "Elena." Damien's voice, controlled but edged with something darker. "It's me. You can open the door." She fumbled with the lock, yanked the door open. Damien stood in the hallway, the gun gone, but tension still radiating from every line of his body. His eyes swept over her, checking for injuries with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously protected and exposed. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No, I'm fine." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What happened?" Derek tried to access the building through the parking garage. Damien stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He had a forged security badge and enough information about building protocols to get past the first checkpoint. He didn't make it past the second. Elena's legs went weak. She sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process the reality that Derek had been here, in this building, trying to reach her. "Where is he now?" "Gone." Security escorted him out and banned him from the property. Damien's jaw tightened. "They offered to call the police. I told them not to." "Why not?" The question burst out sharper than Elena intended. "He violated the restraining order, tried to break into private property. This is exactly the kind of thing the police are supposed to handle. The police would take a report, maybe arrest him, and he'd be out in hours with a good lawyer and minimal consequences." Damien's voice was flat, matter of fact. "I have a better solution." Elena looked up at him, seeing cold calculation in his eyes, and felt fear curl in her stomach. Not fear of Damien, not exactly, but fear of what he might do, what lines he might cross on her behalf. "What kind of solution?" she asked carefully. "The legal kind." Damien pulled out his phone, showed her a video. Security footage of Derek using forged credentials to access restricted areas. "That's a felony. Add it to the restraining order violations, the property destruction at your shop, and the evidence my team has been gathering about his financial irregularities, and we have a case that even his family's connections can't make disappear." Elena watched the footage. Grainy security camera video of Derek confidently flashing a badge at a checkpoint, talking his way past a guard, moving deeper into the building like he had every right to be there. He looked so normal, so reasonable, someone who belonged in expensive buildings, navigating security with the ease of entitled confidence. "This is enough?" she asked. "To actually stop him?" "Combined with everything else, yes. I've already contacted a prosecutor I know. She's very interested in building a case against Derek Cole, especially given his history." Damien pocketed his phone. "He'll be arrested sometime in the next 48 hours, formally charged. His law firm will be notified. His family's lawyers will scramble, but the evidence is too solid." It sounded too good to be true. Too neat. Elena had spent months fighting Derek through official channels and gotten nowhere. Now Damien was telling her that in less than 2 days, it would all be over. Why would this prosecutor help you? She asked. What do you have on her? Something that might have been respect flickered across Damien's features. Nothing. She's genuinely dedicated to prosecuting domestic violence cases, and she's been frustrated by Derek's family shutting down investigations. I simply provided her with evidence she couldn't get through normal channels and the political cover to pursue charges without career consequences. Political cover from you. From people I know who have influence over the right decision makers. Damien didn't quite smile. I told you, I have resources. Elena wanted to be relieved, wanted to feel the weight of terror lifting from her shoulders. But something nagged at her, some instinct that whispered this was happening too fast, too easily. That Derek wouldn't just fold because Damien had money and connections and security footage. He'll fight back, she said quietly. When he realizes what's happening, when he gets arrested and charged, he'll come after me harder. After you. This will make him more dangerous, not less. Let him try. Damien's voice carried that same cold certainty that had both terrified and reassured her since they'd met. He's out of his depth, Elena. He doesn't understand what he's actually up against. And what is he up against? Elena stood, moving closer to Damien, needing to see his face when he answered. Who are you really? Not the venture capital story. The truth. Damien was quiet for a long moment, and Elena watched him weigh truth against safety, honesty against self-preservation. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost gentle. I'm someone who learned very young that official channels don't protect vulnerable people, that money and power matter more than laws or morality, that the only way to survive in a world controlled by predators is to become something they fear. He met her eyes. I built an empire in the spaces between legal and illegal. I help people the system has failed, and I punish people the system protects. And yes, sometimes that means crossing lines that society has drawn to maintain order. You're a criminal. Elena said it without judgment, just stating fact. By some definitions, yes. By others, I'm a philanthropist who donates millions to domestic violence shelters and funds legal aid for abuse survivors. Damien's smile was bitter. The truth is probably somewhere in between. I'm a man with resources helping people who need it, using methods that wouldn't survive legal scrutiny. Elena should have been horrified, should have run from this admission, this confirmation that she'd accepted help from someone operating outside the law. But instead, she felt something almost like understanding. The system had failed her completely. Police who didn't care, courts that moved too slowly, laws that protected abusers with good lawyers and family money. Damien offered what the system couldn't, actual protection backed by the willingness to use whatever force necessary. I'm not going to pretend to be shocked, she said. I already knew you were dangerous. You told me from the beginning. Knowing and accepting are different things. Damien searched her face. Are you accepting this? Accepting me? I don't know yet. Elena wrapped her arms around herself. But I know I'm grateful. And I know that whatever you are, you've been kinder to me in 3 days than Derek was in 2 years. That has to count for something. Kindness is easy when you have unlimited resources. But there was something almost vulnerable in Damien's expression. The real question is whether you can trust someone who's kind by choice rather than nature. Everyone's kind by choice. Elena moved to the windows, looking out over the city that was starting to lighten with approaching dawn. Some people just make different choices than others. Silence fell between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with implications neither seemed ready to fully acknowledge. Elena could feel the weight of Damien's attention on her back, assessing, calculating, trying to determine if she was genuinely accepting or just too tired to run. You should try to sleep, he said finally. It's almost 5. We can visit your shop later this morning, after things have settled. I won't be able to sleep. Elena turned to face him. Not after this, not knowing Derek was here in your building trying to reach me. Then we'll have coffee and watch the sunrise from the terrace. Damien moved toward the door. Sometimes the best response to terror is aggressive normalcy. Elena followed him through the quiet penthouse to the terrace. The gardens looked different in pre-dawn darkness, mysterious and slightly wild, with the city's lights reflecting off leaves still wet with dew. Damien produced coffee from somewhere. Elena suspected he'd made it while she was processing everything, and they stood at the railing, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to navy to pale gold. "Tell me about the prosecutor," Elena said after a while. "The one who's going to help." Sarah Chen, former public defender who switched to prosecution because she got tired of watching abusers walk free. Damien sipped his coffee. "She's built her career on taking cases other prosecutors won't touch. Domestic violence, stalking, harassment, anything where the victim is typically blamed or dismissed. And she'll really go after Derek, even with his family's money? Especially because of his family's money." Something almost like satisfaction entered Damien's voice. "Sarah hates watching wealthy men buy their way out of consequences. She'll pursue this case with everything she has, and I'll make sure she has the resources to do it properly." "By resources, you mean expert witnesses, forensic accountants, security footage from multiple sources, whatever evidence she needs to build an airtight case." Damien set down his coffee. "All obtained legally, all admissible in court. I don't need to break laws to destroy Derek Cole. I just need to ensure the laws actually apply to him for once." Elena wanted to feel relief, wanted to believe this would work, that Derek would finally face consequences, that she could reclaim her life without constantly looking over her shoulder. But experience had taught her to be cautious with hope. "What if it's not enough?" she asked quietly. "What if his lawyers find a way out? What if the charges get dropped or reduced to nothing? Then we move to less official solutions." Damien said it calmly, without threat or apology. "But Elena, I don't think it will come to that. Derek has been operating with impunity because no one with resources cared enough to stop him. Now someone does. That changes everything." The sky continued its slow transformation, painting the city in shades of rose and amber. Elena drank her coffee and tried to imagine a life where Derek was just a bad memory, where she could work at her shop and live in her apartment and exist without fear poisoning every moment. "What happens after?" she asked. "After Derek is dealt with, after I'm safe. What happens to this?" She gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at Damien, at the strange arrangement they'd fallen into. "That depends on what you want." Damien's voice was carefully neutral. "You're welcome to stay as long as you like, or you can return to your life, and I'll ensure you have adequate security going forward. The choice is yours." "What do you want?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. Damien looked at her with something like surprise, as though the concept of his own wants was foreign. "I want you to feel safe," he said finally. "I want you to rebuild your life without fear. I want—" He stopped, seemed to wrestle with something, then continued. "I want to keep having these conversations, these quiet moments. I want to remember what it feels like to care about someone's well-being without it being transactional or strategic." Elena's heart clenched. She heard the loneliness beneath his careful words, the admission that he'd been alone for so long that simple human connection felt precious. "Then we'll figure it out," she said. "After Derek, after everything settles, we'll figure out what this is and what it could be." Damien nodded, and something that might have been relief crossed his features. They finished their coffee as the sun broke over the horizon, flooding the terrace with golden light that made the whole city look new and full of possibility. Elena was exhausted, but too wired to sleep. Damien seemed similarly restless, so they moved back inside and he showed her how to work the espresso machine while she told him stories about her grandmother's garden. They made breakfast together, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, and ate at the dining table while discussing flower symbolism and the hidden meanings in Victorian bouquets. It was so beautifully, achingly normal that Elena almost forgot about the alarms and Derek's attempted breach and the fact that her life was still balanced on a knife's edge. Marcus arrived at 9, looking slightly worse for wear but professionally composed. "The shop is ready whenever you'd like to visit, Miss Marlowe. We've confirmed the area is secure." Elena changed into clothes that had been cleaned and returned to her. She was going to have to actually go to her apartment soon and get more things if she was staying here, and followed Marcus and Damien down to the waiting SUV. This time, she sat in the back with Damien while Marcus drove, and she was hyper-aware of his presence beside her, of the careful way he maintained distance while still being close enough to offer comfort. The ride to the Arts District felt both too long and too short. Elena's stomach twisted with anxiety about seeing her shop, about reclaiming space Derek had violated, about whether she'd be able to look at it without seeing spray-painted threats and broken glass. But when Marcus pulled up outside Petals and Thorns, Elena's breath caught for entirely different reasons. The shop was beautiful. Better than beautiful. It was transformed. The new windows gleamed in morning sunlight, showcasing displays that were more elegant than anything she'd created before. The door was solid wood with brass fixtures that looked both vintage and somehow new. Through the glass, she could see fresh paint in soft sage green, new shelving in warm oak, and equipment that must have cost 10 times what her entire original setup had been worth. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Too much?" Damien asked, and she heard genuine concern in his voice. "No, it's perfect." Elena climbed out of the SUV before it had fully stopped, drawn to her shop like a plant toward sunlight. She pushed through the door, which moved on smooth hinges that didn't squeak, and stood in the center of her transformed space. Everything was there. Her supplies, her tools, her carefully cultivated inventory of unusual flowers and vases, but it was all arranged with a care and attention that elevated it from functional workspace to something approaching art. Someone had understood her aesthetic, her vision, and enhanced it without overriding it. "I had your inventory photographed before the cleaning crews started," Damien said from the doorway. "Made sure everything was put back exactly where you had it, just in better condition." Elena turned to look at him, and something in her chest cracked open. He stood there in his expensive clothes with his controlled expression, and she saw past all of it to the man who'd spent time and money making sure her dream was restored. Not just repaired, restored and improved, with care taken to preserve what made it hers. "Thank you," she said, and her voice broke on the words, "Damien, I don't know how to thank you for this." "You don't need to thank me." He moved into the shop, hands in his pockets, looking almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I told you, property values and neighborhood improvement." That's still a terrible excuse. But Elena was smiling through tears she didn't remember starting to cry. "This is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me." "Then you've known the wrong people." Damien's voice was soft, almost sad. "Elena, this is the minimum you deserve. A safe place to work, a business that's yours, a life that isn't constantly under threat." Before she could think better of it, before caution could override impulse, Elena closed the distance between them and hugged him. It wasn't romantic or seductive, just a simple embrace of gratitude and connection, arms wrapped around his waist while she pressed her face against his chest and tried not to completely fall apart. Damien froze for a heartbeat, clearly surprised. Then his arms came around her, careful and gentle, holding her while she cried out the terror and relief and overwhelming gratitude of the past few days. He smelled like expensive cologne and coffee, and his heartbeat was steady beneath her ear, and Elena felt safer than she had in months. "I'm sorry," she said eventually, pulling back and wiping her eyes. "I don't usually fall apart on people." "You're not falling apart. You're processing trauma." Damien's hands lingered on her shoulders for a moment before he let her go. "It's allowed." Elena laughed shakily. "You sound like my therapist. Your therapist is probably right." He moved deeper into the shop, giving her space to collect herself. "Do you want to work today? Or just look around and plan?" "I want to work." Elena wiped her face with her sleeve, trying to pull herself together. "I want to make something beautiful, prove to myself that I can still do this." "Then work. Marcus will stay outside. I'll be upstairs in the office coordinating some things. If you need anything, I'll call." Elena managed a real smile. "Thank you for all of this, for everything." Damien nodded and disappeared through the back door that led to the small office above the shop. Elena heard his footsteps on the stairs, then silence. She was alone in her shop, her beautiful, restored, perfect shop. Elena took a deep breath and got to work. She pulled out her inventory lists, checked her cooler temperatures, assessed what flowers needed attention. Then she started creating, a simple arrangement at first, just roses and eucalyptus in a ceramic vase, letting her hands remember the familiar rhythms of stem cutting and leaf stripping and the precise placement that turned separate elements into cohesive beauty. An hour passed, then 2. Elena lost herself in the work, in the green scent and soft petals, and the satisfaction of creating order from chaos. She made arrangement after arrangement, some for display, some just for the joy of making them, and slowly felt pieces of herself clicking back into place. She was elbow deep in a complex centerpiece when the shop door opened. Elena looked up with a welcoming smile, ready to greet her first customer in days. Derek stood in the doorway. The smile died on Elena's face. Her hands froze, shears still clutched in one fist, stems scattered across her work table. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Elena rooted in place behind her counter, Derek blocking her only exit, the morning sunlight streaming through new windows and making everything look surreal and too bright. "Beautiful shop," Derek said conversationally, as though he had every right to be there, as though he hadn't destroyed this exact space 3 days ago. "New windows, new door. Someone's been spending money on you." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You're violating the restraining order. You need to leave." "Or what? You'll call the police?" Derek smiled, and it was the smile she'd learned to fear, charming on the surface, cruel underneath. "They're getting tired of your calls, Elena, starting to think maybe you're the problem here, harassing me, making false accusations." "I haven't made any calls." Elena's hand moved slowly toward her phone, hidden beneath a pile of wrapping paper. "But I will if you don't leave right now. Don't bother." Derek stepped further into the shop, and Elena saw the barely contained rage beneath his civilized veneer. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to have a conversation, adult to adult, about this situation you've created." "I didn't create anything. You destroyed my shop. You stalked me. You tracked my phone and threatened me and tried to break into a private building." Elena was backing toward the rear door, toward the stairs where Damien was supposed to be working. "All of that was you." "Because you left me." Derek's voice rose, cracking the calm facade. "We were happy, Elena. We had a good thing. Then you decided to throw it away over one mistake, one moment when I lost my temper. You broke my wrist, and I apologized. I got help. I went to therapy. I did everything you asked." He was advancing now, closing the distance between them. "But it wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough for you. You just kept pushing me away, kept playing the victim, kept acting like I was some monster when all I ever did was love you." Elena's back hit the counter. She grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she tried to unlock it. "Derek, please, just leave. We can talk later, through lawyers, through proper channels. I'm done with proper channels." Derek was close enough now that she could see the bloodshot eyes, smell the alcohol on his breath. He'd been drinking, was still drunk or getting there, and that made him so much more dangerous. "I'm done with restraining orders and lawyers and waiting for you to come to your senses. We're going to settle this now. You're going to come home with me, and we're going to fix this relationship, and you're going to stop making me the villain." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are." Derek reached for her arm, and Elena swung without thinking. The shears caught him across the face. Not deep, not lethal, but enough to make him stumble back with a cry of pain and surprise. Blood welled from a cut along his cheekbone. Derek touched his face, stared at the blood on his fingers, and something terrible transformed his expression. "You bitch," he breathed. "You actually—" The rear door crashed open. Damien moved like violence given form. He crossed the distance between door and Derek in 3 long strides, grabbed Derek by his expensive suit jacket, and slammed him face first into the counter with a force that made the whole structure shake. Derek tried to fight, tried to throw an elbow, but Damien caught it and twisted his arm behind his back with clinical precision. "If you move, I'll break your arm in 3 places, Damien said calmly, as though discussing the weather. "If you speak, I'll add your jaw to that count. Nod, if you understand." Derek nodded. All his earlier confidence evaporated into whimpering fear. "Good." Damien pulled out his phone with his free hand, never releasing his hold on Derek. "Marcus, I need you inside. We have a situation." Elena stood frozen, shears still clutched in her hand, watching the scene play out like something from a movie. Damien held Derek pinned with effortless strength, expression cold and controlled, and she saw clearly for the first time what he'd told her from the beginning. He was dangerous, trained, someone who'd learned violence as a language and spoke it fluently when required. Marcus appeared within seconds, took in the situation with a single glance. "Police?" "Not yet." Damien's eyes never left Derek. "First, we're going to have a conversation. Elena, are you hurt?" "No?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I'm okay." "Good. Go upstairs, wait in the office. Don't come down until I call you." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to stay and witness whatever came next. But the look in Damien's eyes brooked no argument. This was him protecting her the only way he knew how, and she needed to trust that. She climbed the narrow stairs to the office on shaking legs and closed the door. Through the thin floor, she could hear voices. Damien's calm and controlled, Derek's rising in protest before being cut off sharply. She couldn't make out words, just tone and rhythm and the occasional thud that made her stomach lurch. Then silence. Elena pressed her ear to the door, heart hammering. Nothing. No voices, no movement, no indication of what was happening in her shop. The office door opened. Damien stood there, perfectly composed, not a hair out of place. His knuckles were slightly reddened, but otherwise he showed no signs of the confrontation. "Derek's gone," he said quietly. "He won't be back." "What did you do?" Elena searched his face for signs of violence, of guilt, of whatever had transpired downstairs. "I explained the situation in terms he could understand." Damien stepped into the office, closed the door behind him. "Elena, I need you to listen carefully. In about 20 minutes, the police are going to arrive. Derek called them from the parking lot, claiming you assaulted him with a weapon. They'll take statements, look at the security footage, assess the situation." Elena's blood went cold. "He's claiming I attacked him? He has a cut on his face and your blood on his hands from where he grabbed you." Damien's voice remained steady, anchoring. "But we have security footage showing him entering your shop despite the restraining order, advancing on you aggressively and grabbing you first. You defended yourself with tools that were within reach. Any prosecutor will see this as justified self-defense." "But his family won't matter, not this time." Damien moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "Sarah Chen is already on her way. She'll make sure you're treated as the victim you are, not the aggressor Derek's trying to paint you as. Trust me. This is actually good for us." "How is this good?" Elena's voice rose toward hysteria. "I cut him with shears. I drew blood. That's assault, isn't it? That's self-defense against an aggressor who violated a restraining order and physically grabbed you in your place of business." Damien's hands settled on her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Elena, breathe. This is going to work in your favor. Derek just gave us exactly the evidence we needed to make charges stick." Elena tried to breathe, tried to believe him. But all she could see was Derek's blood on her shears, the look of shocked rage on his face, the certainty that she'd just made everything infinitely worse. "What did you say to him?" she asked. "Before he left. What did you do?" Damien's expression didn't change. "I reminded him that there are consequences for terrorizing vulnerable people, that his actions have been documented and cataloged and will be used against him in court. And I suggested very strongly that if he valued his career, his freedom, and his physical well-being, he would walk away and never contact you again." "That's all?" "That's all he needed to hear." Something dark flickered behind Damien's eyes. Sometimes the threat of violence is more effective than violence itself. Derek understands now that he's out of his depth, that the rules he's used to exploiting don't apply here, that I'm willing to do things he can't imagine to protect you. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Elena's hands shook. Damien pulled her against his chest, and she let him, let herself draw strength from his steady presence. "I've got you," he said quietly. "Whatever happens next, whatever Derek tries to claim, I've got you. You're not alone in this anymore." Elena closed her eyes and tried to believe him, tried to trust that the man holding her could actually keep the promises he was making. Outside, the sirens grew louder, and she braced herself for whatever came next. The police arrived with sirens blazing, painting Elena's restored shop in flashes of blue and red that felt sickeningly familiar. She'd seen those lights too many times before, every time she'd called for help, every time Derek had talked his way out of consequences, every time the system had failed her with professional politeness and empty promises. But this time felt different. This time Damien stood beside her with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly how the next few hours would unfold. Two officers entered the shop, hands resting casually on their belts, in that way that was supposed to look relaxed but really telegraphed readiness for violence. The older one, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked around the shop with sharp, assessing eyes before settling her attention on Elena. "Ma'am, we received a call about an assault. Are you Elena Marlowe?" "I am." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. But I didn't assault anyone. I defended myself. That's what we're here to determine. The officer pulled out a notepad. Can you tell me what happened? Before Elena could answer, the shop door opened again. A woman in her early 40s swept in, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed competent professional and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than Elena's car. She had the kind of presence that commanded immediate attention, not through volume or aggression, but through sheer confident authority. Sarah Chen, District Attorney's Office. She flashed credentials at the officers. Miss Marlowe is represented. All questions go through me. The older officer's eyebrows rose. This is a preliminary investigation, ma'am. We just need her statement, which she'll provide with her attorney present. Sarah moved to stand beside Elena, and her proximity felt like armor. I assume you've also taken a statement from Derek Cole, the man who violated an active restraining order to enter this establishment and assault my client. Mr. Cole claims Miss Marlowe attacked him with a weapon. The younger officer gestured toward the shears, now sealed in an evidence bag on the counter. He has injuries consistent with that claim. And security footage will show he entered this shop in violation of a court order, advanced on Miss Marlowe aggressively, and physically grabbed her before she defended herself. Sarah's voice remained perfectly level, but Elena heard steel underneath. I trust you'll be arresting Mr. Cole for violation of the restraining order, attempted assault, and stalking. The two officers exchanged glances. Elena recognized the look, the calculation of whose story to believe, whose connections mattered more, whose version of events would cause less paperwork and political headache. We'll need to review the footage, the older officer said carefully. Of course. Damien spoke for the first time, his voice carrying quiet authority that made both officers straighten unconsciously. Marcus has already compiled all relevant security footage from multiple angles. You'll find it clearly shows Mr. Cole's violations and Miss Marlowe's defensive actions. Marcus appeared from the back office with a tablet, queuing up the footage with practiced efficiency. Elena watched the officers' expressions shift as they viewed the recording, Derek entering the shop, advancing on her despite her clear distress, grabbing her arm. Then Elena swinging the shears in a panicked arc that connected more by accident than intention. Self-defense, Sarah said quietly, clear as day. My client feared for her safety from a man who has a documented history of violence against her, who violated a restraining order to confront her in her place of business. Any reasonable person would have reacted the same way. The older officer closed her notepad with a snap that sounded like resignation. We'll need to take Miss Marlowe's formal statement, and we'll be speaking with Mr. Cole about the restraining order violation. Excellent. Sarah's smile was professional and sharp enough to cut. My client will be happy to cooperate fully. In fact, I'd like to discuss additional charges related to Mr. Cole's pattern of harassment, stalking, and property destruction over the past several months. What followed was 2 hours of careful statement giving, with Sarah coaching Elena through every answer, ensuring nothing she said could be twisted or used against her. The officers took photos of the grab mark on Elena's arm, where Derek had seized her, documented the shop's security measures, and reviewed Marcus's footage multiple times. Finally, the older officer stood, tucking away her notepad. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Marlowe. We'll be in touch if we need anything else, and we'll be having a conversation with Mr. Cole about his restraining order violation. See that you do, Sarah said pleasantly, because if charges aren't filed by end of business tomorrow, I'll be filing them myself, along with a formal complaint about police inaction in a domestic violence case. The threat hung in the air, polite but unmistakable. The officers left without further comment, and Elena sagged against the counter the moment the door closed behind them. That went well? Sarah said, settling onto one of Elena's work stools with the ease of someone used to long days in uncomfortable places. Derek made a critical error coming here, gave us exactly the evidence we needed to make this case airtight. He didn't seem to think it was an error. Elena's hands still shook. He was so confident, like he knew the police would take his side. Because they usually do, Sarah's expression turned grim. Men like Derek are very good at playing victim when their targets fight back. But this time we have ironclad video evidence, a documented pattern of abuse, and a prosecutor who actually gives a damn. The odds just shifted dramatically in your favor. Damien had been watching the exchange with quiet intensity. Now he spoke, voice carefully neutral. What's the timeline? Derek will be arrested within 48 hours on multiple charges: restraining order violation, attempted assault, stalking, and we're building a case for the property destruction at the shop. Sarah pulled out her own tablet, scrolling through documents. His lawyers will fight, of course, but the evidence is too strong. Best case for him is a plea deal that includes mandatory counseling, probation, and a permanent restraining order with serious jail time if he violates it. And worst case? Elena asked. He goes to trial, gets convicted on all charges, and spends the next 2 to 5 years in prison. Sarah looked up, and her expression was fierce. Either way, he's done terrorizing you. I'll make sure of it. Elena wanted to feel relief, wanted to believe that this nightmare was finally ending. But years of disappointment had taught her caution. What if his family intervenes, gets charges dropped or reduced? They'll try. Sarah's smile turned predatory. But I've been collecting evidence on Derek Cole for months, ever since I heard about the previous restraining orders that mysteriously disappeared. I have statements from 3 other women he's harassed, financial records showing he's been embezzling from client accounts to fund his stalking activities. Enough dirt to bury him 6 times over, and enough political capital to ensure his family's lawyers can't make it go away. The casual mention of months of investigation made Elena blink. You've been watching him before any of this? I watch all of them. Sarah's voice hardened. Every entitled man who thinks money and connections make them untouchable. Every abuser who uses the system as another weapon against their victims. Derek Cole has been on my radar since the second restraining order disappeared. I just needed the right case, the right victim willing to fight, and the right evidence to make charges stick. She looked at Damien, and something passed between them. Some understanding Elena couldn't quite read. Mr. Vale provided the resources I needed to build an airtight case, Sarah continued. Security footage, financial records, witness statements, everything obtained legally and admissible in court. Your boyfriend is very thorough. He's not my... Elena started, then stopped, because she didn't actually know how to finish that sentence. What was Damien to her? Protector, certainly. Friend, maybe. Something more complicated than either word could capture. Damien's expression didn't change, but Elena thought she saw amusement flicker in his eyes. Regardless of relationship status, Sarah said, standing and smoothing her suit, the point is that Derek Cole's reign of terror is over. He'll be arrested, charged, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And Elena, you'll finally be free to live your life without looking over your shoulder. The word should have brought joy, relief. Something other than the numb exhaustion that settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. But freedom felt too abstract, too distant after months of constant fear. Sarah left with promises to keep them updated and warnings not to have any contact with Derek under any circumstances. Marcus resumed his post outside, a silent guardian against further intrusion. And Elena stood in her beautiful, restored shop, trying to process that the nightmare might actually be ending. You should close early, Damien said quietly. This has been enough for one day. I haven't even been open. Elena looked around at the arrangements she'd made, at the work she'd thrown herself into before Derek had shattered her fragile peace. I wanted to prove I could still do this, still create something beautiful, despite everything. You did. Damien moved to one of her arrangements, white peonies mixed with deep purple irises, elegant and unexpected. This is beautiful. Everything you've made today is beautiful. But Elena, you don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all to yourself. Don't I? The words came out harsher than intended. Derek spent 2 years convincing me I was weak, helpless, incapable of surviving without him. Part of me still believes that. Still thinks I need rescuing, need someone stronger to protect me because I can't protect myself. You protected yourself today. Damien's voice was firm. You set boundaries. You defended yourself when he violated them. And you stood your ground when the police came. That's not weakness. That's strength. I swung garden shears at his face and got lucky. You reacted appropriately to an immediate threat using tools within reach. That's textbook self-defense. Damien crossed to her, and Elena saw something fierce in his eyes. Stop diminishing your own courage. You've survived months of systematic abuse and harassment. You built a business from nothing. You ran into a stranger's elevator and trusted your instincts enough to accept help when you needed it. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Elena's throat tightened. She'd been telling herself the opposite for so long, that she was weak for staying with Derek, weak for not fighting back sooner, weak for needing help instead of handling everything alone. Hearing someone she respected call her strong felt like being given permission to believe something she'd been afraid to hope. "I don't feel strong," she whispered. "Strength isn't about feeling invincible. It's about continuing despite fear." Damien's hand found hers, warm and steady. "You've been doing that all along. You just didn't recognize it." Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed. Not the new one, the old one, still in her purse despite Damien's advice to destroy it. She pulled it out with a sense of sick inevitability. A text from Derek, sent from a number she didn't recognize. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you've just made everything worse. For you, for him, for everyone you care about. I'll make sure you regret this." The words blurred as Elena stared at them, feeling the familiar cold dread seeping back into her bones. Of course it wasn't over. Of course Derek had found a new number to contact her. Of course he was still threatening, still trying to terrify her into submission. "Elena!" Damien's voice cut through the rising panic. "Look at me." She did. His eyes were calm, steady, anchoring. "This is what abusers do when they're losing control," he said quietly. "They escalate the threats because the reality is slipping away from them. Derek knows he's about to be arrested. He knows the evidence is overwhelming. This text is desperation, not power." "It doesn't feel like desperation." Elena's hands shook around the phone. "It feels like a promise." "Then let me make you a promise." Damien took the phone from her, read the message with clinical detachment, then forwarded it to Sarah Chen. "Derek Cole will not hurt you. He will not hurt anyone you care about. He will not win. I will personally ensure that every threat he makes becomes another nail in the coffin of his prosecution." You can't promise that, but Elena wanted desperately to believe him. "I can, and I am." Well, Damien's jaw tightened. "I've dealt with men like Derek my entire life. They're all the same, convinced their money and connections make them invincible, shocked when someone with more resources decides to stop them. Derek is about to learn a very painful lesson about the limits of his power." The certainty in his voice should have been arrogant, should have felt like another man trying to control her situation, but Elena heard the difference. Damien wasn't claiming ownership of her safety. He was offering his resources to support her fight, standing beside her rather than in front of her. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide." Damien set down her phone. "You can close the shop and come back to the penthouse where security is absolute. You can stay here and work while Marcus maintains perimeter. You can go to your apartment and reclaim that space with appropriate protection. Whatever you need to feel safe while we wait for Derek's arrest." Elena looked around her shop, at the flowers and the beautiful displays and the space she'd worked so hard to create. She thought about running, hiding, letting fear dictate her choices the way she'd been doing for months. Then she thought about her grandmother's philosophy, that beautiful things could exist even in difficult places, that something could push through concrete and still bloom. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to work. I want to prove to myself that Derek doesn't get to take this from me." Something like pride flickered across Damien's features. "Okay, then stay. Work. Marcus will be outside and I'll be upstairs coordinating with Sarah. You're protected." He started toward the rear door, then paused. "And Elena, when you're ready to leave, when you've proven what you needed to prove, we'll go home together, to the penthouse, where we'll have dinner and watch terrible movies and continue figuring out what this is between us." Home. He'd called the penthouse home. Not his home, but home. A shared space, a place they both belonged. The casual intimacy of it made Elena's heart skip. "Okay," she said softly. "I'd like that." Damien smiled, a real smile. Not the controlled expression she'd grown accustomed to, but something genuine and warm, then disappeared upstairs. Elena spent the next 3 hours losing herself in flowers. She made arrangements for the window display, elegant compositions that would attract customers once she actually reopened. She organized her inventory, planned future orders, sketched ideas for seasonal offerings. She did all the small, normal tasks that made up the business of being a florist, and with each completed task, she felt pieces of herself clicking back into place. Derek had tried to destroy this, had smashed her windows and spray-painted threats, and done everything he could to make her afraid to exist in this space. But she was here anyway, creating beauty despite his attempts to spread destruction. Her phone rang. The new one this time, Sarah Chen. Derek was just arrested, Sarah said without preamble, at his office in front of his colleagues and senior partners. He's being charged with multiple counts, including restraining order violation, stalking, attempted assault, and criminal harassment. Bail hearing is tomorrow morning. Relief flooded through Elena so intensely she had to sit down. It's really happening. It's really happening. And Elena, there's more. Sarah's voice carried barely suppressed satisfaction. When they arrested him, Derek made some very unwise choices. Resisted arrest. Threatened the officers. Made statements about you that were caught on body camera. He just handed us additional charges and evidence of ongoing threat. He couldn't help himself, Elena said, and almost laughed at the absurdity. Even when he's being arrested, he can't stop trying to intimidate and control. Which is exactly what I'm counting on. Men like Derek are their own worst enemies. They're so convinced they're untouchable that they can't conceive of actual consequences. Sarah paused. The bail hearing tomorrow, I'm recommending he be held without bail as a flight risk and ongoing danger to you. His lawyers will fight it, but given his behavior during arrest and the threatening text he sent after the shop incident, I think the judge will agree. Elena tried to imagine Derek in jail, stripped of his expensive suits and family connections and the veneer of respectability that had protected him for so long. Part of her felt vindicated. Another part just felt tired. What do you need from me? She asked. Nothing right now. Just stay safe, stay away from him, and let the system actually work for once. Sarah's voice softened. You did everything right, Elena. Everything. You survived, you documented, you asked for help when you needed it. Now, let me do my job. They hung up, and Elena sat in the quiet shop, trying to process that the nightmare was actually ending. Derek was arrested, charged, facing real consequences for the first time in his privileged life. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollowed out, exhausted in ways that went deeper than physical tiredness. Damien appeared in the doorway to the back office, reading her expression with unsettling accuracy. Sarah called you. Derek's been arrested. He's being charged with everything. Elena set down her phone. It's over, or starting to be over. How do you feel? It was such a simple question, but Elena found she didn't have a simple answer. Relieved, exhausted, scared that something will still go wrong, grateful to you and Sarah for making this happen, guilty that I couldn't make it happen on my own. You did make it happen. Damien moved into the shop, settling onto one of her work stools. You survived long enough to find people who could help. You accepted that help instead of suffering in silence. You fought back when he cornered you. Every choice you made led to this moment. Don't diminish your role in your own rescue. Elena looked at this man who'd appeared in her life like some dark guardian angel, offering protection and resources and a kind of understanding she'd never expected to find. Thank you, she said quietly. For everything, for the shop, for Sarah, for believing me when so many others didn't. You don't need to thank me. But Damien's expression softened. Elena, helping you has been... He paused, seeming to search for words. It's been the most human I've felt in years, the most connected to something good. You gave me that. If anything, I should be thanking you. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed quite ready to fully acknowledge. Elena thought about the past few days, the terror and protection, the quiet moments over coffee, the way Damien looked at her like she mattered in ways that went beyond simple duty or obligation. What happens now? She asked. After Derek's trial? After everything settles? What happens to us? That depends on what you want. Damien held her gaze. You're welcome to stay in the penthouse as long as you like. I meant what I said about it feeling less like a mausoleum with you there. Or you can return to your apartment and we can see each other without the intensity of this crisis driving everything. Or? Elena prompted when he fell silent. Or we acknowledge that something's developing between us. Something neither of us was looking for, but both of us seemed to need. Damien's voice was careful, cautious. I don't know what that looks like long term. I'm not good at relationships. I'm emotionally unavailable and probably traumatized in ways I haven't fully processed, and dangerous in ways that might always make normal life complicated. I'm terrified of intimacy after Derek, hypervigilant about control, and probably going to need years of therapy to fully unpack everything that's happened. Elena smiled despite the heaviness of the admission. We're quite a pair. We are. Damien's answering smile was soft, almost tender. But maybe that's okay. Maybe two broken people can figure out how to be less broken together. Elena thought about her grandmother's words, that love didn't fix broken people, but it gave them a reason to fix themselves. She looked at Damien and saw someone who'd been alone for so long he'd forgotten what connection felt like. Someone who'd built walls so high that letting anyone in felt revolutionary. She saw someone worth trying for. I'd like to stay, she said, in the penthouse, at least for a while. Not because I'm afraid or need protection, but because I like talking to you over morning coffee. I like watching you try to use the espresso machine. I like the way you look at my flowers like they're something precious. I'd like that too. Damien's voice was rough with emotion he was clearly trying to control. More than I should probably admit. Then let's see where it goes. Elena stood, moving around her work table toward him. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who found each other in unusual circumstances, trying to figure out what happens next. Damien stood to meet her, and when she reached him, he pulled her into an embrace that felt less like protection and more like partnership. Elena wrapped her arms around him and let herself feel safe, not because he was powerful or dangerous or capable of destroying her enemies, but because he was choosing to stand beside her, choosing her company, choosing vulnerability despite years of practiced isolation. Ready to go home? He asked eventually. Yes? And Elena meant it. The penthouse had started to feel like home in ways her apartment never had, not because of the luxury or security, but because of the person who lived there. The quiet conversations and shared meals and moments of unexpected connection. They closed up the shop together, Elena making sure everything was secure while Damien coordinated with Marcus about tomorrow's schedule. The ride back to the building passed in comfortable silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what the future might hold. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of court dates and police statements and the slow machinery of justice finally grinding into motion. Derek's bail was denied, as Sarah had predicted. He spent the weeks before trial in county jail, his expensive lawyers filing motion after motion that Sarah systematically demolished with evidence and legal precedent. Elena watched it unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and exhausted relief. She reopened her shop with improved security and a steady stream of customers drawn by word of mouth and the beautiful window displays. She worked during the day, creating arrangements and building her business, and returned each evening to the penthouse where Damien would be waiting with dinner and conversation and the slow, careful courtship of two people learning to trust again. They didn't rush into romance. Some nights they barely touched beyond casual affection, a hand on a shoulder, a brief hug goodnight. Other nights they'd stay up late talking about childhoods and trauma and the different ways people survived impossible situations. Damien told her about his father's cruelty, about learning to become untouchable because being soft meant being destroyed. Elena told him about Derek's systematic erosion of her self-worth, about forgetting who she'd been before fear became her constant companion. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with the patience of people who understood that healing couldn't be rushed. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Sarah Chen prosecuted with brilliant precision, presenting evidence and witness testimony that painted a damning picture of Derek's systematic harassment. His lawyers tried to discredit Elena, to paint her as unstable and vengeful, but Sarah had prepared for every attack. The security footage from the shop was devastating. The jury watched Derek violate the restraining order, advance on Elena despite her clear distress, grab her arm hard enough to leave bruises. They watched her defend herself with garden shears in obvious fear for her safety. Then came the other victims, 3 women who testified about Derek's obsessive harassment after they'd ended relationships with him. Stories that mirrored Elena's so closely, it was like hearing her own nightmare spoken in different voices. The financial evidence showed embezzlement from client accounts. Money Derek had used to fund his stalking activities, private investigators, tracking software, bribes to people who could provide information about his targets. Derek's carefully constructed image crumbled under the weight of evidence. By the trial's end, he looked less like a successful attorney and more like what he actually was, a predator caught and caged. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Elena sat in the courtroom between Damien and Sarah when the verdict was read. and she felt something inside her finally, truly break free. The fear that had lived in her chest for so long, making every breath heavy and every moment uncertain, it began to dissolve. Derek was sentenced to 4 years in prison with mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order upon release. His law license was suspended pending ethics review. His family's money couldn't save him from the consequences of his own actions. Outside the courthouse, Sarah pulled Elena into a fierce hug. "You did it! You survived! You fought, and you won!" "We did it," Elena corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "That's what the system should do, protect victims instead of protecting their abusers." Sarah stepped back, professional composure returning. "Take care of yourself, Elena. Build your life. Be happy. That's the best revenge." Damien drove them back to the building in unusual silence. Elena watched the city slide past, feeling like she was seeing it for the first time without the filter of fear coloring everything gray. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and amber, and the world looked beautiful in ways she'd forgotten it could be. "How do you feel?" Damien asked as they rode the elevator up to the penthouse. "Free," Elena smiled, and it felt like the first real smile she'd managed in years. Terrified of what freedom actually means, but free. Freedom is terrifying. Damien took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. But it's also where life actually begins. They spent the evening on the terrace, surrounded by Damien's rooftop gardens, talking about the future for the first time without Derek's shadow hanging over everything. Elena told him about her plans to expand the shop, maybe hire an assistant so she could actually take days off. Damien talked about shifting some of his business focus to legitimate ventures, about using his resources to fund more domestic violence prevention programs. "I want to do better," he said quietly, looking out over the city lights. "Be better. You make me want to be the person my mother thought I could become before my father tried to destroy it." "You're already better than you think." Elena moved closer, letting her shoulder rest against his. "You just needed someone to remind you." They stood together as darkness fell, and Elena felt peace settle over her like a blessing. The nightmare was over. Derek was in prison. She was safe, truly safe, for the first time in years. And she wasn't alone. "Elena." Damien's voice was soft, almost hesitant. "I know we've been taking things slow, being careful not to rush into anything while you're still healing. But I need you to know, I love you. Not as a project or someone to protect. I love who you are, the strength you've shown, the way you see beauty in broken things and refuse to let darkness win." Elena's breath caught. She turned to face him fully, seeing vulnerability in his eyes that he usually kept hidden behind careful control. "I love you too," she said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I didn't plan to. Didn't think I could after everything Derek did. But you're not him. You never were. You're someone who chose to help when you didn't have to. Who gave me back my power instead of trying to take it? Who stands beside me instead of in front of me?" Damien pulled her close, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't careful or cautious. It was a promise that they could build something real together, something founded on mutual respect and hard-won trust instead of fear and control. 6 months later, Elena stood in her expanded shop, putting the finishing touches on an elaborate wedding arrangement. She'd hired 2 part-time assistants and could actually take Sundays off now. The business was thriving, her reputation growing, her dream becoming more real every day. The bell over the door chimed, and Damien walked in, carrying coffee and wearing the slight smile he reserved just for her. "Busy morning?" he asked, setting down the coffee on her work table. 3 weddings next weekend and a corporate event that wants 200 centerpieces." Elena stepped back to admire her work. "I might need to hire another assistant." "Sounds like success." Damien moved behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you." Elena leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how natural this had become. They'd moved slowly, carefully, building trust brick by brick. She still lived primarily in the penthouse, though she'd reclaimed her apartment as a workspace and occasional retreat when she needed solitude. Damien had started attending therapy, working through decades of trauma with the same focused intensity he applied to everything else. They weren't perfect. Some days were harder than others. Elena still flinched at sudden movements sometimes. Damien still struggled with expressing emotion. But they were healing together, in the way her grandmother had described, not fixing each other, but giving each other reasons to fix themselves. I was thinking, Damien said carefully, about the rooftop terrace. It's too big for just gardens. What if we converted part of it to a greenhouse, gave you space to grow your own flowers, experiment with unusual varieties? Elena turned in his arms, seeing the hope in his eyes. He was offering her more than a greenhouse. He was offering a future where they built something together, where the penthouse became truly theirs instead of just his. I'd love that, she said. On one condition. What's that? We paint the window boxes together. Pick out the colors, do the actual work, make it something we create instead of something staff handles. Elena smiled at his slightly alarmed expression. You need to get your hands dirty occasionally. Remember what it's like to build something from nothing. Fair. Damien kissed her forehead. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at manual labor. Then I'll teach you. Elena pulled him closer. The way you taught me that, I could be strong, that I deserve safety and respect and love that didn't come with conditions. They stood together in her shop, surrounded by flowers and the life she'd rebuilt from ruins, and Elena felt gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She'd survived the worst and found unexpected grace on the other side. Found a man who was just as broken as she was, but willing to do the work of healing. Found herself again stronger and clearer than before. The nightmare with Derek was over. But the dream, the real life she was building with courage and flowers and love that felt like freedom, was just beginning. That evening, they worked together in the rooftop gardens, planning the greenhouse and painting window boxes in soft sage green that matched her shop. Damien got paint on his expensive clothes and laughed about it instead of worrying. Elena taught him the names of different flowers and their meanings, and he listened with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered. As the sun set over the city, painting everything in gold and rose, Elena looked at this man beside her, this complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle man who'd offered her protection and given her partnership instead, and felt hope bloom in her chest like peonies in spring. Beautiful, temporary, spectacular while it lasted. But unlike her grandmother's favorite flowers, this beauty didn't have to be brief. With care and attention and the courage to keep growing even through difficult seasons, what they'd planted together could last. What are you thinking about? Damien asked, paint streaked and smiling in the fading light. Peonies, Elena said, and the difference between beautiful things that fade and beautiful things that endure. And which is this? He gestured between them. Elena thought about everything they'd survived to reach this moment, the terror and protection, the careful trust building, the choice to heal together instead of suffering alone. She thought about Damien's rooftop gardens and her flower shop and the life they were building in the unlikeliest place. This endures, she said with certainty. If we choose to make it, then I choose it. Damien took her paint-stained hand in his. Every day, for as long as you'll have me. Forever sounds good, Elena said, and kissed him as the city lights began to sparkle below them like stars fallen to earth. She'd run into Damien Vale's elevator broken and terrified, looking for escape from a monster who'd tried to destroy her. She'd found something she never expected, a man who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway, who'd given her back her power and asked for nothing but the chance to stand beside her. Together, they'd turned fear into safety, isolation into connection, darkness into light. And in her shop and his gardens, in morning coffee and painted window boxes and quiet conversations on rooftop terraces, they built a life worth living. A life where beauty could exist despite darkness, where broken people could heal together, where love wasn't a cage but a garden, something that required care and attention and the courage to keep growing. Elena had learned that you couldn't always escape the storms, but you could find shelter. You could accept help. You could fight back when necessary and forgive yourself when you couldn't. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you could find someone who saw you in your worst moment and chose to stay anyway. Who built greenhouses for your dreams and stood beside you while you learned to bloom again. That was worth more than any fairy tale ending. It was real. It was hers. And it was enough.